There is a moment, just before dawn, when the Acropolis of Athens emerges from darkness not through sudden illumination, but through a gradual revelation, a slow transformation from shadow to form that seems less like sunrise than like the world itself coming into being, creating itself moment by moment from the void of night. The rock rises from the city below, a limestone outcrop that is both natural and sculpted, both geological formation and human achievement, crowned with structures that have stood for nearly 2.5 millennia, that have witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, that have been damaged and restored and transformed, yet remain fundamentally themselves, eternally present despite the passage of time. This is the moment to approach, when the tourists have not yet arrived, when the heat of the Mediterranean day has not yet descended, when the light is soft and uncertain, when the Parthenon stands in a silence that feels sacred, not because of religious ritual, but because of pure presence, because of the weight of history and achievement concentrated in this place, because of what this building represents about human aspiration and capability, about the pursuit of perfection, about the creation of beauty that transcends its original purpose and becomes something universal, something that speaks across cultures and centuries to anyone willing to listen. The path up the western slope has been walked by millions, ancient Athenians in procession bearing gifts to Athena, Roman tourists seeking culture and legitimacy, Byzantine Christians transforming pagan temples into churches, Ottoman administrators converting sacred spaces to practical purposes, European travelers on the Grand Tour seeking connection to classical civilization, modern visitors from every corner of Earth drawn by the fame and beauty of this place. Each footfall on the ancient stones connects you to this lineage, makes you part of a continuing relationship between humanity and this particular arrangement of marble, this structure that is simultaneously building and idea, physical object and cultural symbol, ancient ruin and living presence. The propylaea, the monumental gateway, frames your approach, channels your movement, prepares you psychologically for what lies beyond. This is intentional architecture, designed experience, the manipulation of space and perception to create specific emotional and intellectual responses. The ancient architects understood that encountering sacred space should not be casual or sudden, but should be gradual, should involve passage through thresholds, should allow anticipation to build, should make arrival feel like achievement rather than accident. You are not simply walking to a building, but are participating in a choreographed experience that has been designed with as much care as the buildings themselves. And then you see it, across the open space of the Acropolis Plateau, standing where it has stood since 438 BCE, damaged but not destroyed, altered but recognizable, diminished from its original glory yet still overwhelming in its beauty and its presence, the Parthenon, the temple of Athena Parthenos, the virgin goddess, the patron deity of Athens, the embodiment of wisdom and strategic warfare, of civilization and craft, of all that the Athenians believed made their city special, made their culture superior, made their achievements worthy of celebration and commemoration in the most magnificent temple they could conceive and build. Your first impression might be of size, though the Parthenon is not enormous by the standards of later architecture, not comparable to Gothic cathedrals or modern skyscrapers, measuring approximately 69 meters long by 31 meters wide, with columns that rise slightly more than 10 meters above the platform on which they stand. But size is only part of the effect, perhaps not even the most important part. What strikes you, what captures attention and holds it, what makes the Parthenon different from other ancient temples that might have similar dimensions, is a quality harder to define, harder to put into words,
a sense of rightness, of perfection, of proportions so carefully calculated and executed that the building seems not constructed but inevitable, not designed but discovered, as though this particular arrangement of stone is the only possible arrangement, is the Platonic ideal of temple made manifest in marble. This sense of perfection is not accidental. Every dimension of the Parthenon, every relationship between parts, every detail of its execution reflects conscious choices made by architects and sculptors working at the height of Greek classical civilization, applying mathematical principles and artistic sensibilities developed over generations, creating not merely a functional temple, but a demonstration of what human hands and minds can achieve when they pursue excellence without compromise, when they refuse to accept good enough and insist on perfection even when that perfection requires extraordinary effort, when they are willing to invest resources and time and skill in refinements so subtle that casual observers might not consciously perceive them, but that fundamentally affect the building's appearance and impact. The columns are not straight. The platform on which they stand is not level. The spaces between columns are not uniform. The building's sides are not parallel. These irregularities, these deviations from what might seem like obvious correct form, are not errors or structural settlements, but are intentional refinements, deliberate distortions introduced to correct for optical illusions, to make the building appear more perfect than any building with truly straight lines and level surfaces could appear. This is one of the great secrets of the Parthenon, one of the elements that separates it from merely good architecture and elevates it to the extraordinary, the invisible curves that make the visible form appear flawless.
The other great secret, or perhaps the same secret expressed differently, involves proportion, involves the mathematical relationships between the building's dimensions, involves a specific number, a specific ratio that appears throughout nature and art, that the Greeks understood and valued, that modern scholars call the golden ratio, or phi, a proportion that seems to embody beauty, that appears in the spiral of nautilus shells and the arrangement of flower petals, in the proportions of the human body and the structure of DNA, in the Parthenon's facade, and in countless other works of art and architecture across cultures and centuries. Whether the Parthenon's architects consciously employed the golden ratio, or whether they arrived at proportions approximating it through aesthetic intuition, remains debated, but the presence of this proportion in the building's design is undeniable, contributes to the sense of harmony and rightness that characterizes the structure, connects it to broader patterns in nature and mathematics. To understand the Parthenon, to grasp what makes it extraordinary rather than merely old and famous, we must explore both of these secrets, the invisible curves and the golden ratio, the optical refinements and the mathematical harmonies, the technical innovations and the aesthetic principles that combine to create beauty that transcends time and culture. We must understand not just what the Parthenon is, but how it achieves what it achieves. Not just its appearance, but the thinking and work behind that appearance. Not just the result, but the process, the choices, the skills, the vision that made this particular result possible. But we must also understand the Parthenon in context, must grasp what it meant to the Athenians who built it, must see it not as isolated artistic achievement, but as political statement, religious expression, imperial monument, civic pride made stone. The Parthenon did not emerge from a vacuum, but from specific historical circumstances, from the particular moment when Athens stood at the height of its power and prosperity, when democracy was flourishing, when empire was expanding, when culture was reaching peaks of achievement that would influence Western civilization for millennia.
The building embodies this moment, captures it in marble, preserves it despite all that has changed since, despite the collapse of Athens' empire, despite the transformation of its political system, despite the centuries of foreign rule, despite the damage and decay and conversion to other purposes. The Parthenon remains, testimony to what Athens was and what it achieved, to the vision that created it and the skill that executed that vision. The light is rising now, the sun clearing the eastern horizon, beginning its daily journey across the sky. The marble of the Parthenon catches this light, glows with it, transforms from gray shadow to golden stone, reveals the warm honey color that distinguishes Pentelic marble, shows the slight sparkle from mica crystals embedded in the stone, displays the weathering of 25 centuries, the way wind and rain and pollution have affected the surface, creating texture and variation, adding the patina of age to the perfection of form. The building is both ancient and present, both ruin and masterpiece, both damaged and beautiful, inviting us to see not just what remains, but what was, not just the stones, but the vision they embody, not just the architecture, but the civilization that produced it. Let us approach more closely. Let us walk the perimeter, observing from different angles, noting how the building changes with perspective, how each viewpoint reveals different aspects, how the architects designed from multiple vantage points, ensuring that the building works compositionally from every angle. Let us examine the columns, running our hands over marble carved with such precision that blocks weighing tons fit together without mortar, held by gravity and friction, by the perfection of their shaping, by craftsmanship that modern stonemasons struggle to match even with power tools and computer-aided design. Let us look up at the entablature where metopes once depicted battles between Greeks and Amazons, between gods and giants, where the frieze showed the Pan-Athenaic procession, where the pediments contained sculptures representing the birth of Athena and her contest with Poseidon for patronage of Athens. Let us understand that what we see, impressive as it is only a shadow of what was, that the Parthenon we encounter is stripped of its sculptures, stripped of its color, stripped of its roof, stripped of its cult statue, yet remains powerful, remains moving, remains capable of inspiring awe. If this ruin can affect us so profoundly, imagine what the complete, perfect, polychromed Parthenon of 438 BCE must have been like. Imagine the impact on Athenians who saw it not as historical monument, but as contemporary achievement, as proof of their city's greatness, as physical embodiment of their values and their victories. The day is beginning. Other visitors are starting to arrive. The sacred quiet of dawn gives way to the ordinary sounds of tourism, of cameras clicking and guides explaining and children asking questions. But the Parthenon itself remains unchanged by these sounds, remains present in its calm perfection, continues to demonstrate what it has demonstrated for 25 centuries, that human beings, when they commit themselves fully to excellence, when they apply skill and knowledge and effort without stint, when they pursue perfection in form and proportion and detail, can create beauty that endures, can make stones sing, can build monuments that transcend their time and place and become part of the permanent treasury of human achievement. To understand why the Parthenon was built, why Athens invested so heavily in reconstructing the Acropolis temples, why the citizens voted to spend resources on architecture and sculpture rather than on military expansion or other practical purposes, we must understand Athens in the 5th century BCE, must grasp the historical moment that produced this building, must see the Parthenon not as isolated achievement, but as expression expression of a particular culture at a particular time, as the physical manifestation of Athenian identity and Athenian ambition during what would later be called the Golden Age of Athens, the age of Pericles, when democracy and empire and culture combined to create a civilization that would become a model and inspiration for Western civilization for more than 2 millennia.
Athens, in 450 BCE, is a city transformed from what it had been just 50 years earlier. The Persian Wars, that existential struggle between Greek city-states and the massive Persian Empire, have been fought and won, though at terrible cost. In 480 BCE, the Persians captured Athens, burned the Acropolis, destroyed the temples and statues, desecrated the sacred spaces, left the city in ruins. The Athenians, having evacuated, watched from their ships as their city burned, as everything they had built over generations was destroyed in a matter of days. The trauma of this destruction, the violation of their sacred spaces, the loss of their physical heritage, marked Athens profoundly, created a determination that once the Persians were defeated, once Greece was secure, the destroyed temples would be rebuilt, would be reconstructed in even more magnificent form, would demonstrate that Athens had not merely survived, but had thrived, had emerged from the war stronger and more confident than before. But between the Persian destruction of 480 BCE and the beginning of Parthenon construction in 447 BCE, Athens changed in fundamental ways. The city that rebuilt the Acropolis was not simply reconstructing what had been destroyed, but was making a statement about what Athens had become, about its new position in the Greek world, about its transformation from one city-state among many into the leader of a league that was rapidly becoming an empire, into the dominant naval power in the Aegean, into the wealthiest city in Greece, into the cultural center where artists and philosophers and writers gathered, where democracy was not just practiced, but was being theorized and refined, where freedom and achievement seemed to go hand in hand, where citizens believed they were living in a moment of particular brilliance, of civilization reaching heights that might never be matched. The Delian League, formed initially as a defensive alliance against possible Persian return, had evolved under Athenian leadership into something resembling an empire. Other cities contributed ships or money to the common defense, but increasingly Athens controlled these resources, used them not just for mutual protection, but for Athenian purposes, for maintaining and expanding Athenian influence, for building Athenian power. The League treasury, originally kept on the sacred island of Delos, was moved to Athens in 454 BCE, nominally for better security, but effectively putting these funds under direct Athenian control. This treasury, contributions from hundreds of allied cities, represented enormous wealth, created resources that Athens could deploy for various purposes, including the reconstruction of the Acropolis. The decision to use League funds for rebuilding Athenian temples was controversial. Thucydides, the historian, records debates in which some Athenians questioned whether money contributed for common defense should be spent on Athenian monuments, whether this was legitimate use of allies' contributions or was essentially theft, was decorating Athens at other cities' expense. Pericles, who dominated Athenian politics during this period, argued that Athens provided protection and leadership, that the League benefited from Athenian power, that Athens had earned the right to beautify itself, that magnificent buildings served common Greek interests by demonstrating Greek civilization's sophistication and achievement, by creating monuments that all Greeks could take pride in, by showing what Greek culture could accomplish when properly led and funded. The arguments apparently prevailed, or at least Pericles' political dominance allowed him to push through his vision, and the decision was made to rebuild the Acropolis temples on a scale and with a magnificence that would make them not just religious structures, but statements about Athens' position, Athens' wealth, Athens' cultural sophistication. The Parthenon, as the centerpiece of this rebuilding program, would be larger and more elaborate than any previous Doric temple, would employ the finest architects and sculptors available, would spare no expense in materials and craftsmanship,
would be designed to impress not just Athenians, but anyone who saw it, would proclaim that Athens was the greatest city in Greece, that Athenian democracy produced superior results, that Athenian empire and Athenian culture were inseparable, were mutually reinforcing, were together creating a civilization that merited celebration and emulation. Pericles himself, according to Plutarch writing centuries later, was the driving force behind the building program, the political leader who championed the vision, who defended the expense, who selected the artists and architects, who monitored progress, who ensured that quality was maintained. Pericles' Athens was democratic in its political structure. Citizens voted on laws and policies, held officials accountable, participated directly in governance. But it was led by individuals who gained influence through persuasion and political skill rather than through formal authority. Pericles held no office that gave him power to command, but his ability to persuade the assembly, his reputation for wisdom and integrity, his vision for what Athens could be, gave him effective leadership for decades, allowed him to shape Athenian policy in ways few democratic leaders ever achieve. The democracy itself was limited by modern standards. Only adult male citizens could vote, excluding women, slaves, and foreign residents, meaning that perhaps 30,000 men out of a total population of perhaps 300,000 had political rights. But within this limited franchise, the democracy was real, was participatory, involved citizens in governance to a degree unusual in the ancient world. Citizens not only voted on laws, but served on juries, held administrative positions, participated in the assembly where policies were debated and decided. This involvement in governance created a sense of ownership, a feeling that Athens belonged to its citizens, that achievements were collective achievements, that buildings like the Parthenon were not royal monuments but civic expressions, were the people's temples, were demonstrations of what free citizens could accomplish when they worked together, when they pooled resources and efforts, when they pursued common goals.
The Athenian belief in their exceptionalism, their sense that Athens represented the best of Greek civilization, was not entirely without foundation. The city had attracted talents from across the Greek world. Phidias, the sculptor from Athens, Ictinus, the architect, possibly from elsewhere, Sophocles and Euripides, the playwrights, Socrates, the philosopher, Herodotus and Thucydides, the historians, countless others who made Athens their home, who contributed to its cultural flowering, who participated in creating what we call classical Athenian civilization. This concentration of talent was partly natural. Success breeds success, and talented people gravitate toward places where they can find audiences and opportunities, but was also deliberately fostered by Athenian policies that welcomed foreigners, that provided venues for performance and publication, that rewarded excellence, that created an environment where culture could flourish. The context for the Parthenon's construction thus includes democracy and empire, wealth and confidence, cultural achievement and political ambition, all combining in a particular historical moment when Athens had the resources to build magnificently, the motivation to make statements about its greatness, the artistic and technical capabilities to execute visions of unprecedented ambition. The building is not just a temple, but is a political document, is propaganda in the best sense, is Athens' argument for why it deserves to lead, why its form of government produces superior results, why other Greeks should accept and support Athenian dominance. But even as the Parthenon was being built, even as Athens celebrated its achievements and proclaimed its greatness, seeds of future troubles were being sown. The empire that provided wealth for building created resentment among supposed allies who felt exploited. The confidence that led to magnificent architecture also led to aggressive foreign policies that would eventually bring Athens into conflict with Sparta and its allies, leading to the Peloponnesian War that would drain Athenian resources, damage Athenian power, ultimately lead to Athens' defeat and the end of its brief period of dominance. The Parthenon would be completed in 438 BCE, but by 431 BCE, Athens would be at war, and by 404 BCE, Athens would be defeated, its walls pulled down, its empire dissolved, its brief moment of supremacy ended.
Yet the Parthenon survived these disasters, survived the end of the democracy that built it, survived the Macedonian conquest, survived transformation from Greek city-state to Roman provincial capital, to Byzantine backwater to Ottoman possession. The building outlasted the empire that funded it, outlasted the political system that produced it, outlasted the particular religious practices it was designed to serve, becoming something more than what its builders intended, becoming a symbol not just of Athens, but of classical civilization generally, of Greek achievement, of human capacity for creating beauty and meaning through architecture and art. The historical moment that produced the Parthenon was brief, but the building itself has proven remarkably durable, remarkably adaptable, remarkably capable of accumulating new meanings while retaining its original power to move and inspire. The decision to rebuild the Parthenon, to construct a new temple dedicated to Athena on the Acropolis, required not just political will and financial resources, but also required finding the right people to design and execute the project, required architects and sculptors capable of realizing an ambitious vision, capable of working at the highest level of technical and artistic achievement. Athens in the mid-5th century BCE was fortunate in having access to such talents, in being the kind of place where the best artists and craftsmen wanted to work, where major commissions attracted major talents, where the combination of resources and ambition created opportunities for excellence. The architects chosen for the Parthenon were Ictinus and Callicrates, though ancient sources are not entirely consistent about their roles and contributions. Ictinus is generally credited as the principal architect, the designer responsible for the building's overall conception and proportions, the mind behind the mathematical refinements and optical corrections that make the Parthenon distinctive. Callicrates is sometimes described as the supervising architect, the person responsible for execution and construction, for translating design into built reality, for managing the craftsmen and laborers, for ensuring that the vision was realized with proper precision and quality. This division of labor, designer and executor, conceptualizer and builder, makes sense for a project of this complexity, where both creative vision and practical management were essential, where someone needed to imagine what should be built and someone else needed to make it happen. What we know about Ictinus comes primarily from Vitruvius, the Roman architectural writer, who credits him with designing not just the Parthenon, but also the Temple of Apollo Epicurus at Basae, another masterwork of classical Greek architecture, notable for its innovative design, including what may be the earliest Corinthian column. If Ictinus designed both buildings, this demonstrates his range, his ability to work in different architectural orders, his willingness to innovate while respecting traditional forms. The Parthenon is fundamentally Doric in its order and proportions, but it includes subtle Ionic elements as well, particularly in the continuous frieze that runs around the cella wall, suggesting that Ictinus was not a purist, but was willing to blend elements from different traditions when this served his aesthetic purposes. Callicrates is mentioned in inscriptions as one of the architects, though his specific contributions are harder to determine. Some scholars suggest he may have been responsible for preliminary work on the site, for designing the new platform and foundations before Ictinus became involved, for establishing the building's footprint and orientation. Others suggest he worked alongside Ictinus throughout the project, perhaps handling construction administration while Ictinus focused on design refinements. The exact division of labor between them remains uncertain, but clearly both were skilled professionals, masters of their craft, chosen for this commission because they could be trusted to deliver excellence.
But perhaps the most important figure in the Parthenon's creation was neither of the architects, but was instead Phidias, the sculptor, who was given oversight of the entire Acropolis building program, who designed the sculptural decoration for the Parthenon, who created the colossal cult statue of Athena Parthenos that stood inside the temple, who was responsible for the artistic vision that made the Parthenon not just an architecturally refined building, but a comprehensive artistic statement, a complete work of art where architecture and sculpture worked together to create unified effect. Phidias, while already famous when he received this commission, was recognized as the greatest sculptor in Greece, had created colossal statues for other locations, had worked in bronze and in the chryselephantine technique of gold and ivory over wooden cores. His reputation was such that Pericles entrusted him with supervising the entire building program, making him effectively the artistic director of the Acropolis reconstruction, giving him authority over not just his own sculptures, but over the architectural designs, over the overall aesthetic unity of the project. This was unusual authority for a sculptor, reflects both Phidias's personal reputation and the Athenian understanding that on a project like this, artistic vision needed to guide technical execution, that beauty and meaning were at least as important as structural soundness and practical function. The collaboration between Phidias and Actinus must have been close and extensive. The Parthenon sculptural program is not an afterthought, not decoration applied to a completed building, but is integral to the design from the beginning. The building's proportions account for the sculpture, create spaces and contexts for it, ensure that architecture and sculpture work together. The pediments, those triangular spaces at each end above the columns, were designed to hold sculptural compositions depicting mythological scenes. The metopes, the square panels between the triglyphs in the Doric frieze, were carved with high-relief sculptures depicting various mythological battles. The continuous Ionic frieze inside the colonnade showed the Pan-Athenian procession, the annual festival honoring Athena, connecting the temple to the civic life of Athens. All of this sculpture was planned from the project's beginning, was designed by Phidias or under his supervision, was executed by teams of sculptors working to his designs and under his artistic direction. The Athena Parthenos statue, the cult image that stood inside the temple's main chamber, was Phidias's personal masterpiece, a colossal figure approximately 12 meters tall including its base, constructed in the chryselephantine technique with gold plates for drapery and exposed ivory for flesh. The statue held a statue of Nike, the goddess of victory, in one hand and a spear in the other, wore a helmet, had a shield resting beside it, represented Athena in her aspect as warrior goddess, as protector of Athens, as bringer of victory. The statue was overwhelming in its scale and richness, was designed to inspire awe, to manifest divine presence, to make worshippers feel they were in the actual presence of the goddess, not just viewing a representation of her. This statue no longer exists. It was destroyed or disappeared in late antiquity, but we know about it from descriptions and from smaller copies, from coins and gems that show reduced versions, from literary accounts that describe its appearance and impact. The loss of the Athena Parthenos is one of the great tragedies of art history, comparable to the loss of all the other ancient masterworks that survive only in descriptions or copies, that we know existed and were magnificent, but that we can never see, never experience directly, can only imagine based on fragments and echoes. The vision for the Parthenon thus came from multiple sources, from Pericles and the Athenian democracy deciding to build magnificently, from Actinus designing refined and mathematically harmonious architecture, from Callicrates managing construction to exacting standards, from Phidias creating sculptural programs that gave meaning and emotional impact, from hundreds of craftsmen executing the designs with skill and precision. The building is not the work of a single genius, but is collaborative achievement, is the product of a society that valued excellence and was willing to invest in it, that had the wealth and the organization to sustain major projects, that had developed the technical skills and artistic sensibilities to execute ambitious visions, that created conditions where talents could combine and amplify each other, where the best architects and sculptors could work together rather than competing, where collective achievement could exceed what any individual could accomplish alone. The names Actinus, Callicrates, and Phidias have come to us, preserved by ancient writers who documented who designed and built this famous temple.
But we should remember that their names represent hundreds of unnamed craftsmen, stonecutters and sculptors, carpenters and metalworkers, laborers and skilled specialists, all of whom contributed to the Parthenon's creation, all of whose hands shaped the stone, whose efforts raised the columns, whose skills carved the sculptures, whose work made the vision real. The building is theirs as much as it is the famous architects and sculptors, is a testament to what ordinary people can accomplish when they are well-led and well-organized, when they commit to quality, when they take pride in their work, when they are part of something larger than themselves, contributing to a project that will outlast them, creating beauty that will be remembered and valued long after their names are forgotten. The beauty of the Parthenon, the sense of rightness and perfection that characterizes the building, rests on mathematical foundations, on proportions and relationships calculated according to principles that the Greeks understood and valued, that they applied not just to architecture, but to sculpture and music, to pottery and urban planning, to any art form where proportion and harmony mattered. To understand the Parthenon's mathematics, to grasp why its proportions feel so satisfying, so balanced, so perfect, we must understand Greek mathematical aesthetics, must explore their belief that beauty could be quantified, that there were objective standards of proportion, that certain numerical relationships created harmony while others created dissonance.
The Greeks believed, in ways that seem almost mystical to modern sensibilities, in the power of number, in the idea that mathematical relationships governed not just the physical universe, but also aesthetic quality, that the same ratios and proportions that appeared in nature also produced beauty in art, that mathematics was the key to understanding both the cosmos and the creation of meaningful, beautiful form. This belief was associated particularly with Pythagoras and his followers, who discovered that musical intervals, the relationships between notes that sound harmonious when played together, corresponded to simple numerical ratios, the octave as 2:1, the perfect fifth as 3:2, the perfect fourth as 4:3. These discoveries suggested that harmony in sound was mathematical, that beauty could be calculated, that there were objective principles determining what sounded good, that these principles might apply to other arts as well. From these observations about music came broader theories about proportion in visual arts. If harmonious musical intervals corresponded to simple ratios, perhaps harmonious visual forms also involved specific mathematical relationships. Greek architects and sculptors sought these ideal proportions, experimented with different ratios, codified relationships that seemed to work, created systems of proportion that governed their designs. The Parthenon represents the culmination of these experiments, embodies in stone the mathematical principles that Greeks believed produced perfect form. One number, one ratio, appears throughout nature and art with remarkable frequency, the golden ratio, called phi after the Greek letter phi, approximately equal to 1.618. This ratio has unique mathematical properties. If you have a line segment divided into two parts, such that the ratio of the whole to the longer part equals the ratio of the longer part to the shorter part, you have divided the line in golden ratio. Expressed algebraically, a plus b over a equals a over b equals phi. This creates a proportion that appears frequently in nature, in the spiral of nautilus shells, in the arrangement of seeds in sunflowers, in the structure of human bodies, in the structure of spiral galaxies, in countless other contexts where organic growth and optimal packing create forms that humans find aesthetically pleasing. The Greeks certainly knew about the golden ratio, studied its properties, used it in their art and architecture, though they probably did not call it golden. That term came later, in the 19th century, and their theoretical understanding of it may have been less developed than ours. But whether they understood all of phi's mathematical properties or simply recognized empirically that rectangles with proportions approximating 1.618 to 1 looked more harmonious than other rectangles, they employed this ratio in their designs, created forms that embodied this proportion, producing works that felt balanced and beautiful in ways that other proportions did not. The question of whether the Parthenon's architects consciously and deliberately used the golden ratio in their design remains debated among scholars. Some measurements of the building's dimensions produce ratios very close to phi: the ratio of the building's width to its height including the pediment, the ratio of column spacing to column diameter, the ratio of various other dimensions. These correspondences could be intentional, could reflect conscious application of golden ratio principles by Athena, or they could be coincidental, could reflect the fact that Athena was aiming for proportions that looked right, that his aesthetic judgment led him to ratios approximating phi even if he was not explicitly calculating golden rectangles, that his eye was good enough that he arrived at mathematically optimal proportions through visual trial and refinement rather than through geometric construction. The evidence is ambiguous. Ancient sources do not explicitly state that the Parthenon was designed using the golden ratio, do not provide detailed accounts of the architect's design process, do not give us direct access to their thinking. What we have is the building itself, its dimensions, the proportions that can be measured and analyzed. Modern scholars measuring these dimensions find ratios close to phi in various places, but also find deviations, find dimensions that do not quite match the golden ratio, find enough ambiguity that both those who argue for deliberate use and those who argue for coincidence or approximation can marshal evidence for their positions. What we can say with confidence is that the Parthenon's proportions are carefully calculated, are not arbitrary or accidental, reflect sophisticated mathematical understanding, whether or not that understanding included explicit knowledge of the golden ratio as we understand it. The building's overall dimensions, the relationships between different architectural elements, the sizing of columns and spacing between them, all follow proportional systems, demonstrate careful attention to numerical relationships, create visual harmony through mathematical means, even if we cannot be entirely certain which specific mathematical principles were being applied. The effect of these mathematical proportions is not just visual, but is psychological, affects how we respond to the building, why it feels balanced and harmonious rather than awkward or arbitrary. Human brains are pattern recognition machines, constantly analyzing visual input for regularities and relationships, responding positively to forms that show order and proportion, finding beauty in mathematical relationships even when we cannot consciously articulate what those relationships are. The Parthenon works on this level, creates responses in viewers who know nothing about golden ratios or architectural proportion, who simply see a beautiful building without understanding the mathematics that make it beautiful. This is the power of well-proportioned architecture. It affects us whether or not we understand it intellectually, creates aesthetic pleasure through formal relationships that our perceptual systems recognize and respond to even without conscious awareness. The Parthenon's architects understood this, knew that their job was not to create mathematically interesting forms, but to create beautiful ones, that the mathematics was means rather than end, was tool for achieving visual harmony rather than goal in itself. The building succeeds aesthetically because its proportions work, because the mathematical relationships create visual balance and pleasure, because form and number align in ways that the human perceptual system finds deeply satisfying.
The mathematical beauty of the Parthenon is not separate from its visual beauty, but is the foundation of that beauty, is how the architects achieved the sense of perfection that characterizes the building. Other temples of the same period, built by competent architects using similar techniques and materials, do not affect us the way the Parthenon does, do not create the same sense of absolute rightness, do not rise to the same level of aesthetic achievement. The difference lies largely in proportion, in the mathematical relationships, in the care with which Ictinus calculated dimensions and ratios, in his determination to achieve not merely good proportions, but optimal ones, to create not just a competent design, but a perfect one. This pursuit of perfection through mathematics characterized Greek classical architecture generally, but it reached its peak in the Parthenon, created a building that has served as a model and inspiration for architectural proportion for 25 centuries, that has been studied and measured and analyzed by generations of architects seeking to understand what makes it work, why it achieves effects that other buildings cannot match, how mathematics and aesthetics combine to create beauty that transcends cultural and temporal boundaries, that speaks to people across ages and civilizations, that demonstrates universal principles of form and proportion that the Greeks discovered and that remain valid and powerful today. But the Parthenon's mathematical sophistication extends beyond overall proportions into a realm of refinements so subtle, so extraordinary, so unexpected that when they were first systematically documented in the 19th century, architects and scholars could hardly believe what they were discovering. The building that appeared to exemplify straight lines and perfect geometry was actually a structure where almost nothing was truly straight, where horizontal lines curved, where vertical lines leaned, where spacing varied, where the architects had deliberately distorted every major element of the design in carefully calculated ways that compensated for optical illusions, that made the building appear more perfect than any truly straight, truly level, truly uniform structure could ever appear. This is the secret of the invisible curve, the discovery that revolutionized understanding of Greek architecture, that revealed the extraordinary sophistication of Parthenon design and construction, that demonstrated how deeply the architects understood human vision and perception, how far they were willing to go to achieve perfection, how much labor and skill and precision they were willing to invest in refinements that most viewers would never consciously notice, but that fundamentally affected the building's appearance and impact. The most dramatic of these refinements is the curvature of the stylobate, the platform on which the columns stand, what appears to the eye to be a perfectly flat, perfectly level surface. In fact, the stylobate curves upward along both its length and width, rising approximately 6 centimeters at the center of the long sides and about 11 centimeters at the center of the short ends. This is not structural settlement or foundation failure. The curve is built into the platform deliberately, each stone carefully cut to maintain the curve, the entire platform forming a section of a very large cylinder rather than a flat plane. Why introduce this curve? The reason is optical correction. A truly flat, truly level platform, particularly one of the Parthenon's dimensions, tends to appear to sag in the middle when viewed from a distance, to look like it's drooping, like the center is lower than the ends. This is an optical illusion, a consequence of how human vision processes horizontal lines over significant distances, but it is a real perceptual phenomenon that affects how the building appears. By curving the platform upward, by making the center actually higher than the ends, the architects compensate for this optical effect, make the platform appear to the eye to be perfectly level, even though it is geometrically curved, create the illusion of perfect straightness through actual curvature. The precision required to execute this refinement is extraordinary. Each stone in the stylobate must be cut to maintain the curve, must fit perfectly with its neighbors while contributing to the overall upward curvature, must be positioned with accuracy measured in millimeters to ensure that the curve is smooth and consistent. This is not work that can be done roughly or approximately. Small errors would accumulate and destroy the effect, would create visible irregularities, would undermine the very perfection the refinement is meant to achieve. The ancient stonemasons achieved this precision using bronze tools and careful measurement without the benefit of modern surveying equipment or power tools, demonstrating a level of skill and dedication that challenges modern capabilities even with vastly superior technology.
The curvature of the stylobate carries through the entire building. The entablature, the horizontal structure that sits atop the columns, also curves upward, following the curve established by the platform. The roof, now lost, presumably curved as well, maintaining the subtle upward arc through the building's full height. These horizontal elements, all curved in ways that made them appear straight, created a unified refinement, ensured that the optical correction worked throughout the structure, that every major horizontal line created the illusion of perfect geometry through actual distortion.
But the refinements extend beyond the platform. The columns themselves incorporate a subtle curvature called entasis, a slight swelling of the shaft approximately 1/3 of the way up from the base, a gentle widening that makes the column appear straight and regular, even though it is actually slightly barrel-shaped. The entasis addresses another optical illusion. Perfectly straight columns, particularly those with the proportions of the Parthenon's Doric columns, tend to look concave when viewed from a distance, appear to curve inward, to be thinner in the middle than at top and bottom. This creates an unsatisfying appearance, makes the columns look weak or incorrectly proportioned, undermines the visual effect the architecture is trying to achieve. By introducing entasis, by making the columns slightly convex, the architects compensate for this optical phenomenon, make columns that are actually curved appear to the eye to be perfectly straight, create the impression of strength and stability through a refinement that is invisible to casual observation but essential to the building's visual success. The amount of curvature in the entasis is tiny, perhaps 2 centimeters at the point of maximum swelling on columns that are 10 meters tall. But this small deviation from true straightness has significant perceptual impact, fundamentally affects how the columns appear, demonstrates how sophisticated the architect's understanding of optics and perception was. The columns also lean inward, inclining slightly toward the building's center, creating a convergence that would, if the lines were extended upward, cause them to meet approximately 1,500 meters above the ground. This inward lean addresses the optical tendency of perfectly vertical columns to appear to fall away from the building, to look like they are leaning outward, especially when viewed from below at the angles typical of people standing on the ground and looking up at the building. By making the columns actually lean inward, by introducing this calculated deviation from true verticality, the architects make them appear to stand perfectly upright, create the visual impression of verticality through actual inclination. Even the spacing between columns varies, though this variation is more subtle than the other refinements and may serve multiple purposes. The corner columns are slightly thicker than the others and are spaced slightly closer to their neighbors, addressing the optical problem that corner columns, seen against bright sky rather than against the building behind them, tend to look thinner and weaker than interior columns. By actually making them thicker and placing them closer to their neighbors, the architects compensate for this optical effect, ensure that corners appear as strong as the rest of the building, prevent the visual weakness that perfect uniformity would create. These refinements, the curved platform, the curved entablature, the column entasis, the inward lean, the varied spacing, represent an extraordinary investment in perfection, demonstrate architects who understood that technical correctness and aesthetic success were not the same thing, that creating a building that looked perfect required making it geometrically imperfect, that optical correction demanded physical distortion, that achieving the appearance of straight lines and right angles required curves and inclinations. The precision with which these refinements were executed, the skill required to carve and position thousands of tons of marble to maintain subtle curves and calculated irregularities, the dedication to perfection that motivated this extraordinary effort, all of this marks the Parthenon as exceptional, separates it from merely competent architecture, places it in that highest category of human achievement where form and function align perfectly, where means and ends justify each other, where the result is beauty that transcends its time and place.
The optical refinements of the Parthenon are not unique to this building. Other Greek temples of the classical period show similar features, demonstrate that these techniques were part of the architectural tradition, were understood and practiced by Greek architects generally. But nowhere were these refinements executed with the precision and completeness found in the Parthenon. Nowhere were they carried through so systematically. Nowhere did they contribute so effectively to creating perfection in built form. The Parthenon represents the culmination of this tradition, the moment when optical refinement reached its highest expression, when theory and practice aligned perfectly, when ambition and capability matched. To understand why the architects invested such effort in these refinements, why they insisted on precision measured in millimeters on a building measured in tens of meters, we must understand the optical phenomena they were correcting, must grasp how human vision works, how we perceive straight lines and right angles, how distance and angle and context affect perception, how what we see is not identical to what is physically present, but is constructed by our brains from sensory input processed through complex visual systems that can be fooled, that can be manipulated, that can be corrected through conscious counter-distortion. Human vision is not a passive recording of objective reality, but is an active construction, a process where the brain takes input from the eyes and interprets it, fills in gaps, makes assumptions, applies patterns learned through experience, creates a coherent mental representation of the external world that is usually accurate enough for practical purposes, but that can be systematically wrong in certain circumstances, that can be tricked by optical illusions, that can perceive things that are not geometrically present while failing to perceive things that are geometrically present. Architects working at the level of the Parthenon's creators understood this, recognized that designing for perception meant accounting for how vision actually works rather than how it theoretically should work, meant accepting that geometric correctness and perceptual correctness were different things, meant that achieving the latter sometimes required violating the former.
The phenomenon where horizontal lines appear to sag in the middle, where the center appears lower than the ends, is real and consistent, can be demonstrated with experiments, has been studied by psychologists and perceptual scientists. The exact mechanism is debated. It may involve how the eye processes the full extent of a long line, may relate to how the brain interprets perspective cues, may be affected by context and background. But the effect is reliable enough that architects must account for it, must recognize that long horizontal lines will appear to droop unless compensated for, must introduce upward curvature if they want the appearance of perfect levelness. Similarly, the phenomenon where perfectly straight columns appear to curve inward, where they look thinner in the middle than at top and bottom, is a reliable optical effect that has been observed and documented across cultures and time periods. The ancient Greeks were not the only builders to discover this. Other architectural traditions have independently developed similar refinements, have arrived at the conclusion that straight columns need entasis to appear straight, that compensation for optical effects is necessary for aesthetic success. But the Greeks, and particularly the Parthenon's architects, carried this understanding to exceptional levels, applied it with unusual precision, made it central to their architectural practice in ways that other traditions did not. The inward lean of columns addresses another optical problem related to perspective. When you look up at a building, when columns rise above you and are viewed from below, perfectly vertical elements tend to look like they're falling away from you, leaning outward, especially if you're standing close to the building and looking sharply upward. This is partly a matter of perspective. Vertical lines do in fact appear to converge when viewed from below, converging toward vanishing points in the sky. But it creates an uneasy feeling, makes the building look unstable, like it's about to topple outward. By making the columns lean inward, by actually inclining them toward the building's center, the architects create a compensating effect that makes the columns appear vertical, that gives the building visual stability, that corrects for the optical distortion created by viewing from below.
The precision required to execute these refinements, to maintain them across an entire building, to ensure that curves and inclinations are consistent and accurate, is remarkable and deserves emphasis. Every stone in the stylobate must be cut to a specific curvature, must fit with its neighbors while maintaining the overall curve, must be positioned precisely. Every column drum must be carved with entasis, must maintain the subtle swelling, must align perfectly with drums above and below. Every column must lean at the correct angle, must be positioned so that its inclination matches the designed convergence. Any significant error in any of these elements would be visible, would create irregularities, would undermine the perfection the refinements are meant to achieve. The ancient builders achieved this precision through careful measurement and craftsmanship, through techniques that are only partially understood today, that involved bronze tools and careful observation, that relied on skilled judgment as much as on mathematical calculation. They probably used full-scale wooden templates to check curves, used careful leveling and measuring to maintain angles, used experienced eye to verify that results matched intentions, used iterative refinement to correct errors and achieve target precision. The process was slow and labor-intensive, required hundreds of skilled craftsmen working over years, required continuous quality control and supervision, required organizational sophistication matching the technical sophistication of the design. Modern attempts to recreate the precision of the Parthenon stonework, even using power tools and modern measuring instruments, struggle to match what the ancient builders achieved. This is partly because ancient techniques, while slower, allowed for careful hand fitting and adjustment, allowed for the kind of precise matching that modern industrial processes sometimes miss. It is also because the ancient builders had tremendous experience, had been refining their techniques through generations, had developed skills and sensibilities that take time to cultivate, that cannot be replicated by simply having better tools. The Parthenon stonework represents the peak of a craft tradition, the culmination of centuries of experience and practice, the moment when skill and knowledge and demand for quality all aligned to produce work of exceptional precision and beauty. The result of all these optical refinements, of all this effort and precision, is a building that appears perfect, that creates in viewers the sense that everything is exactly as it should be, that no element is wrong or awkward or out of place, that the whole is harmonious and balanced and beautiful. This appearance of perfection is achieved through imperfection, through deliberate distortion, by making the building geometrically irregular so that it appears perceptually regular. The invisible curves create the impression of straight lines. The actual inclinations create the appearance of verticality. The physical reality and the perceptual reality diverge, and it is the perceptual reality that matters, that creates the aesthetic experience, that makes the Parthenon what it is.
This is one of the great paradoxes of the Parthenon. The building that seems to embody geometric perfection, that appears to be an exercise in straight lines and right angles, is actually curved and inclined and irregular, is deliberately imperfect in its geometry in order to be perfect in its appearance. The Greeks understood that beauty is not objective geometric fact, but subjective perception, that making something beautiful requires making it appear beautiful, that appearance and reality sometimes must diverge if beauty is to be achieved. The Parthenon demonstrates this understanding, embodies it in marble, proves through its enduring impact that the architects were right, that optical refinements work, that investing in these invisible corrections pays dividends in aesthetic quality that last for millennia. The presence of the golden ratio in the Parthenon's design, or at least the approximation of golden ratio proportions in various dimensions of the building, has fascinated scholars and mathematicians for generations, has led to detailed measurements and analyses attempting to determine whether Ictinus consciously employed phi in his design,
or whether the proportions arose through other means, through aesthetic intuition, through traditional proportional systems, through trial and refinement that happened to arrive at ratios close to the golden ratio without explicitly targeting it. The question matters because it affects how we understand Greek architectural practice, reveals what they knew about mathematics and proportion, demonstrates the sophistication of their design methods and the relationship between mathematical theory and artistic practice in classical civilization. The evidence begins with measurements. When you measure the Parthenon's facade, when you look at the relationship between width and height, between the spacings of columns and their diameter, between various other architectural elements, you find ratios that approximate 1.618 to 1, the golden ratio. The overall proportions of the eastern facade, measured from stylobate to the peak of the pediment, create a rectangle whose width-to-height ratio is very close to phi. The width of the columns relative to the spaces between them approximates golden ratio proportions. The relationship between different levels of the entablature shows similar patterns. These correspondences are too numerous and too consistent to be entirely accidental, suggest some organizing principle, some proportional system that generates these particular relationships. But the correspondences are not perfect. When you measure precisely, when you account for refinements and irregularities, when you consider all the various dimensions that could potentially incorporate golden ratios, you find that while many ratios are close to phi, few are exactly phi, that there is variation and approximation, that the pattern is suggestive rather than definitive. This ambiguity allows for different interpretations. Scholars who believe the golden ratio was consciously employed point to the overall pattern, argue that ancient construction methods could not achieve perfect precision, that we should expect some variation, that the preponderance of ratios clustering around 1.618 to 1 indicates intentional use even if execution was imperfect. Scholars skeptical of conscious golden ratio use point to the deviations, argue that if phi was the target, then we should see more consistent adherence to it, that the variations suggest the architects were using other proportional systems that happened to produce ratios similar to phi without specifically targeting it. The theoretical question is whether the ancient Greeks, and specifically the Parthenon's architects, understood the golden ratio as a specific mathematical entity with unique properties, as phi, or whether they understood it more empirically as a pleasing proportion, as a ratio that looked right, without necessarily understanding all its mathematical characteristics. We know that the Greeks studied mathematics sophisticated enough to include irrational numbers, that Euclid's Elements, written about a century after the Parthenon's construction, includes clear descriptions of the golden ratio and methods for constructing it geometrically. We know that Pythagoras and his followers were fascinated by mathematical proportions and their relationship to beauty and harmony. We know that architects of Athena's caliber would have been educated in mathematical principles, would have had access to the best theoretical knowledge of their time. What we do not know is exactly what mathematical knowledge Athena possessed, exactly what design methods he used, exactly how he arrived at the Parthenon's proportions. Ancient architectural treatises that might have explained these methods have not survived. Vitruvius, the Roman architectural writer whose work does survive, discusses proportion and the orders extensively, but does not explicitly mention the golden ratio in the context of temple design, does not provide the kind of detailed design methodology that would allow us to definitively determine whether Greek architects of the classical period were consciously using phi. We are left to infer from the buildings themselves, to measure and analyze and theorize, to make educated guesses about design processes that were never fully documented and that occurred 2.5 millennia ago. One way to approach the question is through comparison. Do other Greek temples of the same period show similar golden ratio proportions? If the Parthenon is unique in this respect, that suggests something special about Ictinus's approach, some knowledge or method he possessed that others did not. If golden ratio proportions appear in many classical Greek temples, that suggests a common practice, a widespread understanding of these proportions as ideal, even if we cannot be certain about the theoretical basis for that understanding. Analysis of other temples yields mixed results. Some show proportions approximating phi in various dimensions, others do not. The pattern is inconsistent in ways that make broad conclusions difficult. The Parthenon may be unique in the consistency with which golden ratio proportions appear, in the number of dimensions that approximate phi, even if it is not unique in showing some relationships that approximate this ratio.
Another approach examines what proportional systems we know ancient Greek architects used. Classical architectural orders, Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, come with sets of traditional proportions, rules governing how thick columns should be relative to their height, how tall the entablature should be relative to the columns, how various architectural elements should relate to each other. These proportional systems, codified in architectural treatises and transmitted through training and practice, gave architects starting points, established relationships that were known to work, that had been refined over generations. Ictinus would have known these traditional proportions, would have started from them, but would have had freedom to adjust and refine, to modify traditional ratios to suit his particular design, to create proportions that served his aesthetic vision. It is entirely possible that Ictinus started with traditional Doric proportions and then refined them, adjusted dimensions to improve the visual effect, made modifications that happened to move various ratios closer to the golden ratio without phi being the explicit target. His eye, trained through years of experience, through studying other buildings and understanding what worked visually, might have naturally gravitated toward these proportions, might have recognized that rectangles with width to height ratios around 1.6 to 1 looked more balanced and harmonious than other ratios, might have arrived at golden ratio proportions through aesthetic judgment rather than mathematical calculation. In this interpretation, the golden ratio appears in the Parthenon not because Ictinus was explicitly calculating phi, but because phi represents an objectively pleasing proportion that skilled designers discover empirically, that looks right to trained eyes, that emerges naturally from the process of refining proportions toward optimal visual effect. This interpretation has merit and should not be dismissed. It does not require attributing knowledge or methods to ancient architects that we cannot prove they possessed. It respects the role of aesthetic judgment and trained intuition in design. It acknowledges that designers can arrive at excellent results without necessarily understanding all the mathematical principles underlying those results, that art and science can produce similar outcomes through different routes, that explicit calculation and refined intuition can both lead to beauty and harmony in proportion. Yet there remains something tantalizing about the golden ratio's presence in the Parthenon, about how many dimensions approximate phi, about how consistently these proportions appear when you analyze the building systematically. It seems almost too coincidental to be entirely unconscious, too pat to be purely the result of good eye and refined judgment. The possibility remains that Ictinus did know about the golden ratio, did understand it as a special proportion, did consciously employ it in his design, did use mathematical construction to create golden rectangles and golden ratios in the building's proportions, did deliberately create a temple whose dimensions embodied this mathematically significant proportion. If so, the Parthenon becomes not just visually beautiful, but intellectually beautiful as well, becomes a demonstration that mathematics and aesthetics are aligned, that the same proportions that have unique mathematical properties also create visual harmony, that phi is special not just as a number, but as a principle of beauty.
The question may never be definitively resolved. Without ancient documents explaining Ictinus's methods, without his own account of how he designed the Parthenon, we must work from the building itself, from measurements that are suggestive but not conclusive, from patterns that are compelling but ambiguous. What we can say is that whether by calculation or intuition, whether through explicit mathematics or refined aesthetic judgment, Ictinus created proportions that approximate the golden ratio with remarkable consistency, that these proportions contribute to the building's beauty, that they are part of what makes the Parthenon aesthetically successful, that they connect the building to broader patterns in nature and mathematics, that they demonstrate a level of sophistication in design that justifies the Parthenon's reputation as one of the masterworks of world architecture. The invisible curves and the golden ratio, the optical refinements and the mathematical proportions work together to create the Parthenon's perfection, combine technical sophistication with aesthetic sensitivity, demonstrate mastery of both perception and proportion, show that the architects understood that beauty emerged from the interaction of multiple factors: geometry and optics, mathematics and craft, vision and execution, all needing to work together, all requiring attention and skill and precision, all contributing to creating a building that has stood for 25 centuries as a model of architectural excellence, as proof of what humans can achieve when they commit fully to perfection, when they refuse to accept good enough and insist on the best possible, when they combine knowledge and skill in pursuit of beauty that transcends time and culture. The Parthenon's marble came from Mount Pentelic, a mountain visible from Athens, rising to the northeast of the city, a source of building stone that the Athenians had quarried for generations, that provided the material for the city's most important buildings, that gave Athenian architecture its distinctive appearance and quality. Pentelic marble is a particular type of marble, fine-grained and relatively homogeneous, white when freshly quarried, but acquiring a golden honey color as it weathers, as iron impurities in the stone oxidize over time, creating the warm tone that characterizes aged Pentelic marble, that gives the Parthenon and other Athenian buildings their particular appearance in sunlight, that seems to glow with captured light, that looks alive in ways that other white marbles do not.
The choice of Pentelic marble was both practical and symbolic. Practical because the quarries were relatively close to Athens, perhaps 15 kilometers from the city, close enough that transport of stone, while still major undertaking, was feasible without extraordinary effort or expense. Symbolic because using local stone, marble from Athenian territory, reinforced the connection between the temple and the city, made the building literally of Athens, not just in Athens, constructed from material that came from Athenian land, that was part of the physical substance of Attica, that made the building and its territory inseparable. Quarrying marble on the scale required for the Parthenon was major industrial operation, required organization and labor and technical skill, required understanding of stone, of how it fractured and behaved, of how to extract large blocks without damaging them, of how to move blocks weighing many tons from quarry face to cutting floor to transport wagons. The quarries at Pentelicon still show evidence of ancient work, still contain blocks that were partially extracted but never finished, still preserve tool marks and wedge slots, still demonstrate the methods ancient quarrymen used to free stone from the mountain. The basic technique involved cutting channels around and beneath the desired block, creating a slot that separated it from surrounding stone, then using wedges to split the block free from its foundation. This required patience and precision. Cutting channels into marble using bronze or iron tools was slow work, requiring constant attention to the direction of natural bedding planes in the stone, to potential fractures or weaknesses, to the orientation that would make splitting easiest. Once channels were cut, wooden wedges were driven into slots at the base of the block and then wedded,
allowing them to swell, creating tremendous pressure that could fracture the stone along desired planes, separating the block from the mountain. If done correctly, this produced a block with relatively clean surfaces, with fractures along planned lines, with minimal damage to the usable stone. Blocks extracted from the quarries were rough, were larger than their final dimensions, contained more stone than the finished architectural element would require. This extra stone, this oversized cutting, provided insurance against damage during transport, allowed for refinement and adjustment during final shaping, gave masons some flexibility in fitting pieces together. The blocks were shaped to rough dimensions at the quarry, were made into approximate cylinders for column drums or approximate rectangles for architrave blocks, were given marks and numbers that would allow them to be identified and properly positioned at the construction site. This rough shaping reduced the weight that had to be transported, eliminated excess stone that would serve no purpose, but still left substantial material for final finishing work that would be done in place, that would involve carving the entasis into columns, creating the curvature in platform blocks, executing all the refinements that made the Parthenon distinctive. Transport from quarry to Athens required wagons pulled by oxen, required roads capable of handling loaded wagons carrying blocks weighing tons, required organization and scheduling, required temporary storage facilities, required coordination between quarrying, transport, and construction to ensure that stone arrived when needed, that the construction site had adequate supply without becoming clogged with excess material. The logistics were complex, required experienced supervisors who understood the entire process, who could anticipate problems and adjust plans, who could keep hundreds of workers employed productively, who could maintain quality while meeting schedules. The total quantity of marble used in the Parthenon was enormous, tens of thousands of tons, representing years of quarrying, thousands of wagon loads, incalculable hours of human and animal labor. This marble, once delivered to the Acropolis, had to be lifted to the construction level, positioned precisely, fitted to neighboring blocks, all requiring wooden scaffolding and lifting equipment, requiring rope and pulleys and levers, requiring understanding of mechanics and careful management of forces, requiring construction techniques that were sophisticated even if they were not employing mechanical power sources beyond muscle and gravity. Pentelic marble's physical properties made it excellent building stone, but also presented challenges. The marble is relatively soft when freshly quarried, easier to carve than harder marbles, but it hardens with exposure to air, becomes more durable over time. This meant that final carving needed to be done while the stone was relatively fresh, before it fully hardened, but also meant that the finished building would be more durable than initial hardness suggested, would resist weathering and damage better than the ease of initial carving might imply. The marble's fine grain allowed for detailed carving, enabled the elaborate sculptures of the metopes and frieze, permitted precision in architectural details, contributed to the refinement and delicacy that characterized the Parthenon's execution. But marble is also vulnerable to certain types of damage. It can fracture under stress or impact, can be broken by earthquakes or explosions, can be damaged by fire or by metal clamps corroding and expanding. The Parthenon has suffered all these insults over its long history, has been damaged by seismic events, has been catastrophically damaged by explosion, has had metal elements corrode and crack the stone they were meant to hold together. Modern conservation efforts must deal with these accumulated damages, must repair cracks and stabilize weakened elements, must replace metal clamps that have failed, must ensure that the surviving marble can continue to stand for future generations. The golden honey color of weathered Pentelic marble is one of the Parthenon's most distinctive visual characteristics, creates the warm glow that makes the building appear to absorb and reflect sunlight simultaneously, that gives it life and warmth, that prevents it from being cold or austere despite its classical restraint.
This color develops over decades and centuries as the marble weathers, as iron compounds in the stone oxidize, as the surface develops a patina that is thin but visually significant. Freshly cut Pentelic marble is pure white, shows no hint of the golden tone, but ancient sources describe the Parthenon as gleaming and brilliant, suggesting that even when new, when the marble was still white, the building was visually striking, was probably more dramatic in its brilliant whiteness than the weathered golden-toned building we see today.
The Pentelican quarries supplied stone not just for the Parthenon, but for many of Athens' most important buildings, provided the material that defined Athenian architectural character, that made the city recognizable, that created visual unity among disparate structures, that ensured that Athenian buildings shared family resemblance, were clearly products of the same place and tradition, even when built at different times by different architects. The mountain and the city were thus connected through stone, through marble that was quarried from Attic soil and shaped into temples and theaters and government buildings, through material flows that bound territory to metropolis, that made Athens not just politically but physically what it was, that gave substance to civic identity, that demonstrated Athenian control over resources and ability to transform nature into culture, raw stone into refined architecture. Today, the Pentelican quarries are protected, are no longer actively worked for large-scale construction, are preserved as historical sites demonstrating ancient quarrying techniques, as sources of small quantities of marble for conservation work, for replacing damaged stones in ancient buildings, for ensuring that repairs match original material. The marble is precious now not for its abundance, but for its specific characteristics, for its ability to match what the ancient builders used, for the continuity it provides across millennia, allowing modern conservators to work with the same material as ancient craftsmen, ensuring that the Parthenon remains as much as possible what it has always been, continues to be built from Pentelic marble, quarried from the same mountain, shaped and placed according to the same principles, connected to its source material in ways that matter for authenticity and for maintaining the building's essential character. The foundation of the Parthenon, the platform on which the temple stands, required as much precision and care as the visible architecture above it, required engineering sophistication to create a level surface on the irregular summit of the Acropolis, required understanding of how to build on bedrock, how to create the subtle curvatures that would be maintained through the full height of the building, how to establish dimensions and orientations that would guide all subsequent construction. This foundation work is less visible, less celebrated than the columns and sculptures, but it is equally essential, is the base on which everything else rests, is work that must be perfect because errors at this level would compound and propagate, would create problems that could not be corrected later, would undermine the entire structure. The Acropolis summit is not naturally level, is irregular limestone bedrock that slopes and undulates, that would not provide adequate foundation for a major temple without modification. Before construction could begin, the site had to be prepared. The rock had to be cut and leveled in some places, built up in others, creating a platform that would support the temple, that would establish the building's orientation and footprint, that would create the level surface, or in this case, the curved surface that appeared level, on which construction would proceed. This preparation was extensive, required removing rock in some areas, adding fill in others, creating retaining walls and support structures, transforming natural irregular surface into controlled architectural base. The three-stepped platform that forms the Parthenon's base, called the crepidema, consisting of the stylobate on top and two lower steps beneath it, rises approximately 1.5 meters above the surrounding Acropolis surface, creates a podium that lifts the temple, makes it more visible, more dramatic, gives it architectural presence beyond what the columns alone would provide. Each step is approximately 1/2 meter high, creating ascent that is ceremonial rather than merely functional, that requires deliberate climbing, that makes approaching the temple a conscious act, that separates sacred space from ordinary ground through vertical displacement as well as through architectural definition.
building these steps with the precision required to maintain the subtle upward curvature, with the accuracy needed to ensure that all dimensions were correct, that all blocks fitted perfectly, that the curve was consistent and smooth, required extraordinary care and skill. Each block in each step had to be cut to specific dimensions, had to have surfaces that matched its neighbors exactly, had to be positioned precisely to maintain overall curvature and alignment. The top surface of the stylobate, the platform where columns would stand, had to be especially precise, because column positions and orientations would be determined by this surface, because any errors here would be magnified in the structure above, because the optical refinements that made the Parthenon special required accuracy in the foundation that would allow those refinements to be executed as designed. Ancient builders achieved this precision using techniques that combined careful measurement with skilled craftsmanship, using bronze tools to cut and shape stone, using leveling instruments to check horizontals and verticals, using measuring cords and rules to verify dimensions, using their trained eyes to judge whether work met standards, using iterative refinement to correct errors and achieve required precision. They probably worked from full-scale drawings or templates for critical dimensions, probably used wooden models or patterns to check curves and profiles, probably measured and remeasured, checked and rechecked, ensuring that every element was correct before moving on to the next. The blocks themselves, weighing hundreds of kilograms or even tons each, had to be lifted and positioned, had to be moved into place and adjusted for perfect fit, had to be secured with no mortar through precise cutting that allowed gravity and friction to hold them together. Iron or bronze clamps and dowels connected blocks together, provided additional security beyond simple stacking, ensured that the structure would resist lateral forces from earthquakes or winds, prevented individual blocks from shifting or separating. These metal elements were set into grooves cut into the stone, were sometimes secured with molten lead poured around them, creating mechanical connections that added strength and stability to the gravity-based structure.
The result of this foundation work is a platform that appears simple, that looks like three straightforward rectangular steps, but that actually embodies complex geometry, precise execution, sophisticated engineering. The upward curvature of the stylobate, the subtle refinements in the steps below it, the precision of cutting and fitting, the care in positioning and connecting, all contribute to creating a base worthy of the temple above it, ensuring that the foundation matches the quality of the visible architecture, that no element of the building is compromised by inadequate basework, that the Parthenon succeeds from ground up, from bedrock to pediment. Modern surveys of the Parthenon's foundation, using precise measuring equipment, have confirmed the accuracy of ancient construction, have documented the curvature with precision that ancient builders achieved without modern instruments, have shown that the platform maintains its designed geometry despite 25 centuries of weathering and stress, despite earthquakes and human damage, despite all the insults the building has suffered. This durability reflects not just good initial construction, but overbuilding, creating structures stronger than strictly necessary, ensuring adequate safety margins, demonstrating that ancient engineers understood that buildings must resist not just expected loads, but unexpected ones, must have reserve capacity for events that cannot be predicted, must be strong enough to survive centuries of use and abuse. The foundation also had to integrate with existing Acropolis structures, had to respect earlier buildings and shrines, had to fit into the sacred geography of the summit, had to establish relationships with other monuments, creating complex constraints that shaped the Parthenon's placement and orientation. The building was positioned to align with earlier temples dedicated to Athena, to maintain traditional orientations, to respect sacred areas and earlier dedications, to fit into a landscape that was already shaped by human use and meaning, that carried histories and associations that new construction needed to acknowledge and incorporate. This integration of new and old, this respect for existing sacred geography while creating new monumental architecture, demonstrates sophistication in urban planning and sacred space design.
shows that the Parthenon's builders were not working with blank slate, but were adding to a complex site. Were creating new layer in a palimpsest of sacred construction. Were making choices that balanced innovation with tradition, contemporary ambition with respect for past. The result is a building that feels right in its place, that seems to belong where it stands, that relates appropriately to its context, even as it dominates that context through its size and magnificence, that demonstrates that great architecture is not just about individual buildings, but about how buildings relate to their sites, to their settings, to the human and natural landscapes they inhabit. The 46 outer columns of the Parthenon, 8 across each end and 17 along each side, counting corner columns twice in this enumeration, are the building's most immediately recognizable features, create the visual rhythm that characterizes the structure, establish the architectural order and proportion, demonstrate the skill and precision that went into every aspect of construction. These columns are Doric order, the oldest and simplest of the Greek architectural orders, characterized by columns with no base, with fluted shafts rising directly from the stylobate, with capitals consisting of simple rounded echinus, topped by square abacus, supporting an entablature with alternating triglyphs and metopes. But simple should not be confused with easy. The apparent simplicity of Doric architecture masks enormous complexity in execution, requires precision and skill that are at least as demanding as more elaborate orders, perhaps more so, because there is nowhere to hide errors, no decoration to distract from proportion and detail. Each column was constructed from multiple drums, cylindrical sections of marble stacked one atop another, connected by wooden or bronze dowels set into precisely aligned holes in top and bottom surfaces, creating vertical alignment, preventing lateral movement, ensuring that the column functioned as a unified structural element rather than as a pile of independent blocks. The drums were rough-shaped at the quarry, were brought to the construction site as approximate cylinders, were fine-tuned and fluted in place after the column was erected, allowing for final adjustments, ensuring that flutes aligned perfectly from drum to drum, creating continuous vertical grooves that run the full height of the column without breaks or misalignments. The number of drums per column varied, perhaps 10 to 12 drums for the Parthenon's columns, each drum perhaps 1 meter tall, creating a total column height slightly over 10 meters from stylobate to capital. The drums had to be lifted and positioned with care, had to be checked for vertical alignment, had to be rotated to ensure that flutes would line up, had to be secured with dowels before moving on to the next drum. This process was repeated 46 times for the outer colonnade, was done with consistency and precision that ensured that all columns were essentially identical, that they all leaned inward at the same angle, that they all incorporated entasis in the same way, that they all contributed equally to the building's visual effect.
The lifting equipment required to raise column drums weighing a ton or more must have been substantial, must have involved wooden cranes or lifting powers, must have used rope and pulleys and human or animal power to raise each drum from ground level to its final position atop the growing column. The techniques are not fully documented. Ancient sources assume readers understand how such work is done, don't explain what would have been common knowledge to contemporary builders. But archaeological evidence and engineering analysis allow reasonable reconstruction of likely methods. Blocks were probably lifted using Lewis lifting devices or rope slings, were raised using compound pulleys that multiplied the force that crews could apply, were positioned using careful coordination between lifting team and placement team, ensuring that the drum was lowered precisely onto the column below it, that dowel holes aligned, that the drums settled into correct position without damage. The precision with which flutes were carved, the uniformity from column to column, the care in maintaining depth and profile, all demonstrate the skill of ancient craftsmen, their ability to execute repetitive work to exacting standards, their commitment to quality that extended to every element of the building, visible or hidden, critical or supplementary. The flutes are all identical in width and depth, all follow the same curves, all meet adjacent flutes at sharp arises, the edges where two flutes meet,
all contribute to the visual unity and perfection that characterize the Parthenon. The entasis incorporated into each column required additional precision in fluting. As the column's diameter changes subtly, swelling slightly in the lower third, the flutes must track this change, must maintain constant depth while following a surface that is not perfectly cylindrical, must be carved to accommodate the curve while remaining visually regular. This is skilled work, requires understanding of three-dimensional geometry, requires ability to translate design intention into stone, requires eye and hand working together, requires mastery that comes from years of practice, from apprenticeship under master craftsmen, from the transmission of knowledge and technique through generations of practice. The column capitals, the transition from vertical shaft to horizontal entablature are simple in form but critical in function. The Doric capital consists of echinus, the rounded cushion-like element that seems to compress under the weight of the entablature, and abacus, the square block that distributes load from the architecture above to the round column below. These elements are carved from single blocks, are shaped to precise profiles, are aligned perfectly with the column shaft below and the entablature above, ensuring that forces flow smoothly through the structure, that loads are transferred efficiently, that no weak points or stress concentrations are created. The spacing of columns creates the rhythm of the colonnade, establishes the visual beat that carries around the building's perimeter, affects how the building is perceived from various distances and angles. The Parthenon's column spacing is not uniform, but varies slightly, with corner columns spaced more closely to their neighbors, with adjustments that account for optical effects and structural requirements, demonstrating once again that nothing about this building is arbitrary or accidental, that every dimension reflects conscious choice, careful calculation, sophisticated understanding of how buildings work visually and structurally. Erecting the columns, completing the vertical elements that would support the roof and entablature, was a major milestone in construction, marked the transition from foundation work to superstructure, demonstrated that the temple was taking shape, was becoming recognizable as building rather than remaining merely platform. When the columns stood complete, when 46 Doric shafts rose above the stylobate, supporting capitals waiting to receive the architecture they would carry, the Parthenon must have been impressive even before the roof was added, even before the sculptures were installed, because the columns themselves, in their precision and proportion and craftsmanship, announced that this was no ordinary building, that here skill and ambition had combined to create something extraordinary, something worthy of the goddess and the city that built it. The Parthenon was never merely architecture, was never just stone and wood and roof. From its conception, it was designed as complete artistic statement, as a building whose structural elements and sculptural decoration would work together to create unified effect, where architecture provided framework for sculpture and sculpture gave architecture meaning and emotional impact, where the whole was greater than the sum of parts because each part was designed with the others in mind, where Phidias's artistic vision integrated with Ictinus's architectural refinement to produce a building that was simultaneously engineering marvel and artistic masterpiece. The sculptural program was extensive, comprehensive, covering the pediments, the metopes, and the continuous frieze, creating three distinct but related contexts for sculpture, three different scales and types of carving, three ways of telling stories and representing the divine, the heroic, and the human. Phidias designed and supervised all of this, created the overall conception, determined themes and compositions, ensured artistic unity across diverse sculptures executed by multiple sculptors working over years, maintained quality control, ensured that even as individual craftsmen contributed their skills, the final result reflected a single guiding vision, a coherent aesthetic, a consistent level of excellence.
The pediments, the triangular spaces at each end of the building above the columns, contained freestanding sculpture in the round, figures carved fully three-dimensionally, designed to be viewed from below and from various angles, representing the most important mythological scenes associated with Athena. The east pediment, above the building's front entrance, depicted the birth of Athena, that miraculous moment when the goddess sprang fully formed and fully armed from Zeus's head, an event witnessed by the assembled gods, a dramatic scene that Phidias arranged across the pediment's awkward triangular space, placing Zeus at the center, placing Athena emerging from his head, surrounding them with other deities who react with appropriate awe and wonder to this extraordinary birth. The west pediment showed the contest between Athena and Poseidon for patronage of Athens, that mythological competition where each deity offered a gift to the city, and the citizens chose Athena's olive tree over Poseidon's salt spring, chose the goddess of wisdom and civilization over the god of the sea, chose the gift that promised long-term prosperity over the gift that demonstrated immediate power. This story had political resonance for Athens, justified the city's devotion to Athena, explained why she was their patron, connected civic identity to divine favor. Phidias's composition placed the two deities at the center, showing the moment of their offering, showing them drawing apart, their chariots and horses pulling away from each other as the contest concludes, creating a dynamic composition that used the awkward triangular space effectively, that drew the eye across the pediment, that told the story clearly while creating beautiful arrangement of forms. Most of the pediment sculptures are now lost or severely damaged. What remains, primarily from the east pediment, now in the British Museum as part of the Elgin marbles, demonstrates extraordinary quality, shows figures carved with anatomical precision, with drapery that seems alive, that clings and flows and reveals the bodies beneath it, that creates rhythms and patterns that are beautiful independent of the narrative they serve. The reclining figures from the east pediment corners, often interpreted as river gods or personifications of rivers or celestial bodies, show relaxed naturalism, demonstrate mastery of human form, create poses that fill triangular spaces elegantly while appearing unstrained and natural. The metopes, the square relief panels that alternated with triglyphs around the building's perimeter, numbered 92, provided spaces for individual sculptural compositions, for scenes that could be viewed and appreciated independently while contributing to thematic programs that ran around the building. Each metope showed a different moment in one of 4 mythological battles. The east metopes showed the Gigantomachy, the battle between gods and giants. The south metopes showed the Centauromachy, the battle between Lapiths and centaurs at a wedding feast. The west metopes showed the Amazonomachy, the battle between Greeks and Amazons. The north metopes, most damaged and difficult to interpret, possibly showed scenes from the Trojan War. These battles were not chosen randomly, but carried symbolic meaning. Each represented the triumph of civilization over barbarism, of order over chaos, of Greek culture over forces that threatened it. The Gigantomachy represented divine order overcoming primordial chaos. The Centauromachy represented civilized Greeks defeating savage centaurs who violated hospitality laws. The Amazonomachy represented Greek male warriors defeating foreign female warriors who inverted proper gender roles. These were stories about maintaining civilization, about defending culture against threats internal and external, about why Greek way of life was worth protecting, why Athena's wisdom and protection were essential to Athens' survival and prosperity. The metope carvings vary in quality and style, reflecting that different sculptors worked on them, that Phidias could not carve 92 metopes personally, but had to rely on teams of craftsmen working to his designs. Some metopes are superb, show the skill of master sculptors, demonstrate anatomical knowledge and compositional sophistication equal to any sculpture of the period. Others are competent but less inspired, show journeyman work, adequate but not exceptional.
This variation is normal for large projects with multiple craftsmen, reminds us that even in masterworks, not every element reaches the highest level, that maintaining overall quality across extensive programs required supervision and quality control, but did not guarantee that every piece would be equally excellent. The frieze, running continuously around the top of the cella wall inside the outer colonnade, was different in conception from pediments and metopes. It used low relief rather than high relief or sculpture in the round, showed figures carved shallowly, emerging only slightly from the background, using subtle modeling and careful composition to create illusion of depth and movement. The frieze's subject was unprecedented for temple decoration. Rather than showing mythological battles or divine scenes, it showed the Panathenaic procession, the annual festival honoring Athena, showing Athenian citizens and officials in contemporary or at least timeless Greek dress, showing horses and riders, showing oxen being led to sacrifice, showing maidens carrying ritual objects, showing elders and musicians and all the participants in this great civic celebration. This was a remarkable choice, to show mortal Athenians on a temple usually reserved for gods and heroes, to elevate civic ceremony to the level of mythological importance, to suggest that Athenian religious practice and Athenian democracy were themselves sacred, were worthy of permanent commemoration in marble, were appropriate decoration for Athena's temple because they represented what Athena protected and what made Athens special. The frieze demonstrated Athenian confidence, Athenian belief in their own exceptionalism, Athenian sense that their achievements merited divine-level celebration, that they had created something unique and valuable, a society worth commemorating in permanent form.
Phidias's design for the frieze was masterful, created continuous narrative that wrapped around the building, showed the procession assembling and moving toward the east end where the gods sat waiting to receive it, where Athena's peplos, the robe woven annually by Athenian women, would be presented. The composition managed the challenge of continuous narrative beautifully, varied the rhythm, created centers of interest, ensured that the frieze worked both as a unified whole and as series of individual moments and groups, demonstrated that relief sculpture could be as powerful and meaningful as sculpture in the round when handled by master designer. Inside the cella, the main chamber of the temple, stood the Athena Parthenos, Phidias's colossal chryselephantine statue, the cult image that was the spiritual and artistic heart of the building, the physical manifestation of the goddess's presence, the object that pilgrims came to see, that received dedications and prayers, that embodied Athenian devotion to their patron deity. At approximately 12 meters tall, including its base, the statue dominated the interior space, created overwhelming presence, demonstrated through scale and precious materials the wealth Athens was willing to invest in honoring Athena, the importance of the goddess to civic identity, the connection between religious devotion and imperial power. The statue's construction in chryselephantine technique, gold plates for drapery, ivory for exposed skin, created surface that caught and reflected light, that gleamed in the relatively dim interior lit primarily by the door and possibly by windows in the ceiling, that seemed alive, seemed to radiate divine power. The gold was not just decorative but was functional wealth, was Athens' treasury in visible form, was reserve that could be melted down in emergency, was statement about resources available to the city, about prosperity and power. The ivory, imported from Africa or India, demonstrated access to international trade networks, showed ability to acquire exotic materials, added to the display of wealth and reach. This statue no longer exists, was destroyed or lost in late antiquity, survives only in descriptions and in smaller copies, in literary accounts that describe its appearance and impact, in reduced versions that give hints of original's grandeur. Its loss is incalculable, removes from our experience what was arguably the most important single artwork of classical Greece, what contemporary viewers considered the pinnacle of Phidias's achievement, what represented Athena not just to Athenians but to the entire Greek world. We can imagine it from descriptions, can mentally reconstruct it from copies and accounts, but we cannot experience it, cannot feel the impact it must have had on visitors entering the dim temple and seeing this colossal gleaming figure,
cannot understand fully what the Parthenon was when it contained this masterwork, when architecture and sculpture combined to create complete sacred space, when the building functioned as it was designed to function, as house for the goddess, as worthy setting for this extraordinary image. The sculptural program transformed the Parthenon from architecture into art, from building into comprehensive statement about Athenian culture and religion, from temple into monument that communicated complex messages about civilization and barbarism, about divine favor and human achievement, about Athens' place in the world and its relationship to the gods. Phidias's genius lay not just in his technical skill, not just in his ability to carve marble or create chryselephantine statues, but in his vision, in his ability to conceive and execute programs that gave buildings meaning, that made architecture speak, that created art that served multiple purposes simultaneously: religious, political, aesthetic, cultural, all integrated into a coherent whole that worked on multiple levels, that satisfied both simple viewers who appreciated beauty and sophisticated viewers who understood references and symbols, that remains powerful even in its fragmentary state, even when removed from original context, even when reduced to museum displays of individual pieces, still demonstrates that the Parthenon was never just building, but was complete artistic achievement, was beauty in service of meaning, was human skill elevated to divine purpose. We see the Parthenon today as white marble, weathered to golden honey tones, austere and classical in its restraint, beautiful in the purity of its forms and the precision of its proportions. But this is not how the ancient Athenians saw it, not how it appeared when new, not how it was designed to be experienced. The Parthenon of 438 BCE was painted, was brightly colored in ways that modern viewers often find shocking, that challenge our assumptions about classical taste, that seem at first glance to violate the restraint and sophistication we associate with Greek architecture. But the ancient Parthenon was polychromatic, was decorated with paint and gold, with blues and reds, with details that enhanced the sculpture and architecture, that created visual effects very different from the white marble we see today. The evidence for this comes from multiple sources. Traces of paint survive on some marble fragments, concentrated in protected areas where weathering has been less severe, showing pigments that analysis can identify. Ancient descriptions mention color, describe temples as brightly decorated, refer to specific colors in specific contexts. Comparison with better preserved examples from elsewhere, from sites where climate or circumstances protected paint, allows inference about what has been lost at Athens. All of this evidence points to the same conclusion. The Parthenon was painted, and the painting was essential to its appearance, was integral to the architectural and sculptural design, was not afterthought but was planned from the beginning. The painting was not random, but followed conventions, used color to clarify and emphasize architectural elements, to make structure legible, to create visual hierarchy, to distinguish different parts of the building. The background of the metopes was probably painted blue, creating contrast that made the white marble figures stand out, that helped the sculpture read clearly from the ground despite being positioned high above the viewer, that solved the visual problem of white figures on white background. The triglyphs were probably painted blue as well, while the regulae and guttae, those small elements below the triglyphs, may have been red, creating pattern and rhythm, making the entablature more visually dynamic, preventing it from being monotonous repetition.
The capitals may have been painted or gilded, their echinus and abacus decorated in ways that emphasized form, that caught and reflected light, that contributed to the building's overall visual effect. The ceiling of the outer colonnade, the soffits above the spaces between columns, may have been painted or gilded as well, creating an overhead surface that reflected light down onto the marble below, that added color to what might otherwise have been deep shadow, that contributed to creating bright, colorful environment that was very different from the austere white we associate with Greek architecture. Inside the temple, the walls were probably painted, decorated with patterns or scenes, creating visual interest in spaces that would otherwise have been plain stone, making the interior as carefully finished and beautiful as the exterior.
The ceiling, probably including wooden coffered elements, would have been painted and possibly gilded, creating overhead surfaces that glowed, that seemed precious and sacred, that made the space feel rich and holy. The Athena Parthenon statue, already gleaming with gold and ivory, stood in this decorated space, was surrounded by painted walls and ceilings, was lit by light that had passed through a doorway and possibly through windows or skylights, creating effects that we can barely imagine, that we can try to reconstruct but cannot truly experience. The paint served multiple functions beyond mere decoration. It protected the marble to some degree, created a barrier between stone and weather, though this was probably secondary benefit rather than primary purpose. It made the architecture legible, clarified forms that might otherwise have been ambiguous or difficult to read, helped viewers understand what they were seeing, how different elements related to each other, what the structural logic of the building was. It created visual hierarchy, emphasized important elements, downplayed less important ones, guided the eye, controlled attention, ensured that viewers focused on what designers wanted them to focus on. But perhaps most importantly, the paint made the temple joyful, made it celebratory, made it appropriate for festivals and processions, for the public religious life of Athens, for the connection between divine and human that Greek religion emphasized. A white marble temple, however beautiful, can feel cold, can feel austere in ways that may seem sophisticated to modern taste, but that may not have felt appropriate for ancient religious practice, for celebrations of Athena, for the lively, communal, embodied religious experience that characterized Greek worship. The painted Parthenon was warm, was welcoming, was visually rich and exciting, invited participation, created environment that was beautiful in ways that enhanced rather than inhibiting religious feeling and communal celebration. The loss of this paint, the weathering away of the polychromy, the transformation of the Parthenon from colored building to white building has fundamentally changed how we experience it, has created aesthetic that the Greeks did not intend, that emerged accidentally through decay rather than by design. Modern reconstructions that show the Parthenon in color often shock viewers, seem garish or inappropriate, violate expectations about classical restraint and good taste. But these expectations are based on the accident of paint loss, are anachronistic, project modern aesthetic preferences onto ancient practice, assume that our appreciation of white marble reflects ancient taste, when in fact it reflects centuries of viewing buildings that have lost their original appearance, of training ourselves to see beauty in weathered ruins rather than in the bright, colorful monuments they once were. Some modern viewers encountering reconstructions of the painted Parthenon resist the idea, prefer the white marble version, argue that it is more beautiful, more sophisticated, more appropriate to the building's architecture. These reactions are valid as expressions of modern taste, but should not be confused with accurate understanding of ancient practice or intention. The Parthenon was designed to be painted, was conceived with polychromy in mind, was incomplete without color, however much modern viewers might prefer the accidental white version that time and weather have created. The challenge for modern preservation and presentation is how to acknowledge this reality, how to help contemporary viewers understand what the building was like originally, how to convey the painted Parthenon without physically repainting the actual building, which would be inappropriate for multiple reasons, destroying authentic ancient surface, imposing modern interpretations of ancient color schemes, creating something new rather than preserving something old. Digital reconstructions, small-scale colored models, exhibits that show painted fragments enlarged and contextualized, all these can help communicate the polychrome reality without compromising the authentic ancient ruins. Understanding that the Parthenon was painted helps us see why certain architectural choices were made, why proportions work the way they do, why sculpture was positioned where it was.
The architects and sculptors were designing for color, were planning for effects that color would create, were thinking about how paint and marble would work together. Modern analysis that ignores this polychromy, that treats the building as though it were designed to be white, misses essential aspects of the design, fails to understand fully what the creators intended, appreciates an accidental aesthetic rather than the deliberate one. The painted Parthenon is lost, cannot be fully recovered, exists now only in imagination and reconstruction, in scholarly attempts to piece together evidence and create plausible visions of original appearance. But acknowledging that loss, understanding that what we see is not what the Athenians saw, helps us appreciate both what remains and what is missing, helps us see the building more completely, helps us recognize that the Parthenon was even more extraordinary than the white marble ruins suggest, was a riot of color and light, was joyful and celebratory, was architecture and sculpture enhanced by painting into complete artistic statement, was designed to be experienced as a complete multi-sensory environment, not as an austere classical form.
The Parthenon served dual functions as temple and as treasury, combined sacred space where Athena was worshipped with secure storage where Athens kept its reserves of precious metals, its emergency funds, its accumulated wealth from tribute and taxation. This combination of functions was not unusual for Greek temples. Many served as treasuries, provided secure storage for valuables, functioned as early form of banks. But the Parthenon's role as treasury was particularly significant given Athens' wealth and power, given the size of the reserves it held, given the political and economic importance of this accumulated treasure. The building's plan reflects these dual functions. The eastern chamber, the larger of the two main interior spaces, housed the Athena Parthenos statue, was the temple proper, was where religious ceremonies occurred, where worshippers came to venerate the goddess, where the statue received dedications and prayers. This chamber was approximately 30 meters long and 20 meters wide, creating space adequate for the colossal statue and for visitors, for processions and ceremonies, for the religious functions that justified the building's existence as temple. The western chamber, smaller and separated from the eastern room, served as treasury, housed the reserves, stored the valuable objects and precious metals that constituted Athens' financial security. This chamber was supported by 4 Ionic columns, creating interior colonnade, providing structural support for the roof, while creating a space that was more subdivided, more secure, more suitable for storage than for public ceremony. Access to this room was probably restricted, was controlled to prevent theft or unauthorized access, reflected the chamber's function as secure storage rather than as public sacred space. The treasury function made the Parthenon politically controversial, made it target of criticism from Athens' allies, who saw their tribute payments being stored in and symbolically converted into Athenian monuments, who questioned whether this was legitimate use of common funds or was Athenian appropriation of resources meant for mutual defense. Pericles' defense of the practice, his argument that Athens deserved to beautify itself, that magnificent monuments benefited all Greeks, not just Athenians, reflects the political tensions surrounding the building's funding and the treasury function. The religious functions centered on Athena worship, on the annual Pan-Athenian festival that was Athens' most important religious celebration, that brought together citizens from throughout Attica, that included processions and sacrifices, athletic and musical competitions, religious ceremonies and civic celebrations, all culminating in the presentation of a new peplos to Athena's statue, in the renewal of the goddess's wardrobe, in the demonstration of ongoing devotion and the maintenance of proper relationship between Athens and its patron deity.
The Great Panathenea, celebrated every 4 years, was particularly elaborate, extended over multiple days, included competitions that drew participants from across the Greek world, awarded prizes of olive oil from sacred groves, created festivals that combined religious devotion with civic pride, with athletic excellence, with artistic performance, with all the elements that made Greek culture vital and attractive. The regular annual Panathenea, celebrated every year between the great festivals, was smaller but still significant, maintained continuity of worship, ensured that Athena received proper honor annually, kept the relationship between city and goddess active and vital. The procession that is depicted in the Parthenon frieze was central to the festival, brought together participants from throughout Athenian society, citizens and metics, resident foreigners, young and old, male and female, all processing together from the Kerameikos, the potter's quarter, through the agora, up the slopes of the Acropolis, through the Propylaea, across the summit to the Parthenon, carrying the new peplos, leading sacrificial animals, bearing offerings, demonstrating through public ritual the unity of the community, the shared devotion to Athena, the proper order of Athenian society, where each group had its place and its role, where hierarchy was maintained but participation was broad, where the festival created temporary unity across social divisions. The sacrifice that concluded the procession, the killing and butchering of cattle on the altar outside the temple, provided meat that would be distributed to participants, created communal feast, ensured that religious celebration included physical sustenance, that worship of the gods involved not just prayer and offering, but also shared meals, communal eating, the reinforcement of social bonds through eating together. This connection between religious ritual and communal feasting was fundamental to Greek religion, made worship embodied practice, made the gods participants in human life rather than distant abstractions, created religion that was social and public rather than purely private and contemplative. Inside the temple, the cult statue received the peplos, received other dedications, armor captured from enemies, precious objects offered by wealthy individuals, thank offerings for divine favor received, votive gifts requesting future blessings, creating accumulation of objects that testified to Athena's power and to Athenian devotion, that made the temple repository of history and gratitude, that connected present worship to past favors, that built continuity across generations. The treasury function, while less visible than religious ceremonies, was equally important to Athens's power and security. The reserves stored in the Parthenon provided emergency funds that could be drawn on in crisis, could finance military operations, could maintain the fleet, could sustain the city during sieges or disasters. The fact that these reserves were stored in Athena's temple, that they were under the goddess's protection, added sacred dimension to fiscal prudence, made financial security part of religious duty, made protecting the treasury part of honoring the goddess. The dual function created building that was simultaneously sacred and practical, that combined spiritual and material purposes, that demonstrated that for ancient Athenians, religion and politics, worship and governance, devotion to the gods and management of civic resources were not separate spheres, but were integrated aspects of communal life, were all part of what it meant to be Athenian, to be part of this particular city with its particular goddess and its particular understanding of how gods and humans interacted, how divine protection and human effort combined to create prosperity and security.
The Parthenon thus represents not just architectural achievement or artistic excellence, but also embodies a worldview, demonstrates a way of understanding the relationship between sacred and secular, between community and divine, between past and present, between who Athenians were and who they hoped to be. The building served these multiple functions simultaneously, was temple and treasury, monument and active institution, historical commemoration and contemporary political statement, demonstration of past achievement and investment in future security. all integrated into single structure that worked on multiple levels, that meant different things to different viewers, but that spoke to all Athenians about their city, their goddess, their civilization, their place in the world. The Parthenon's history did not end with its completion in 438 BCE, did not freeze at that moment of perfection when the building stood new and painted and complete, when the Athena Parthenos gleamed inside, when the sculptures were fresh and undamaged, when the structure embodied everything its creators intended. Instead, the building entered into time, into the flow of history, into the succession of events and transformations that would change it, damage it, repurpose it, yet somehow leave it recognizably itself, leave it standing after 25 centuries as witness to its own history and to the histories of all the civilizations that have possessed and used it. The first transformation came with Athens' defeat in the Peloponnesian War in 404 BCE, the loss of empire and power, the end of the democracy that built the Parthenon, the humiliation of walls torn down and fleets surrendered. But the Parthenon survived this political catastrophe, continued to function as temple, continued to house Athena's statue, continued to receive worship and dedications, demonstrated that buildings can outlast the political systems that create them, that architecture can preserve memory even when power and glory are lost. The Macedonian conquest, the period when Philip II and then Alexander the Great reduced Athens to subordinate ally, brought new masters, but left the Parthenon essentially unchanged, left it as temple, left Athena in her place, perhaps because the Macedonians, themselves Greeks of a sort, respected Greek religion and culture, perhaps because Alexander, educated by Aristotle, saw himself as champion of Greek civilization against Persia, used Athens' cultural monuments to legitimize his own rule as continuation rather than conquest. The Roman period, beginning in 146 BCE when Rome conquered Greece, transformed Athens into provincial capital, into tourist destination for wealthy Romans seeking culture and connection to classical civilization. Romans came to Athens to be educated, studied philosophy and rhetoric, visited famous sites, admired the Parthenon and other monuments, sometimes added their own dedications, generally respected Greek heritage even as they asserted political control. The Parthenon remained temple, continued to function as it had for centuries, was maintained and occasionally modified. Roman emperors made small additions or repairs, but remained fundamentally what it had been, Greek temple dedicated to Athena. The statue of Athena Parthenos disappeared during late antiquity, probably in the 5th century CE, though the exact circumstances are unknown. It may have been destroyed by fire, may have been dismantled for its gold and ivory during financial crisis, may have been removed by Christian authorities opposed to pagan images. Whatever the cause, the statue that had stood for nearly 900 years, that had been the spiritual heart of the temple, that had made the building function as sacred space, vanished, leaving the temple's shell, leaving the architecture without its animating presence, leaving a building that was no longer quite what it had been. Christianity's rise transformed the Parthenon more dramatically. Probably in the 6th century CE, the temple was converted into a Christian church dedicated to the Virgin Mary, Parthenos Maria, the Virgin Mary replacing the Virgin Athena, Christian worship replacing pagan ceremony. These changes were significant, but did not destroy the building's essential character, did not demolish the columns or remove the entablement, worked within the existing structure to create Christian space, demonstrated that ancient temples could be repurposed, could serve new religions while maintaining architectural integrity. For nearly 1,000 years, the Parthenon functioned as church, witnessed Byzantine Christianity, received generations of worshippers who knew nothing of Athena or of the building's origins, who saw it simply as the church where they prayed, where they baptized their children, where they celebrated Christian mysteries, where the building's history before Christianity was irrelevant or unknown, where the past had been effectively erased by the present. The Ottoman conquest of Athens in 1458 brought new masters, new religion. The Parthenon became a mosque. Its apse was modified to create mihrab pointing toward Mecca. A minaret was added. Islamic call to prayer replaced Christian liturgy. Muslim worship replaced Christian ceremony. These changes were less extensive than the Christian conversion had been, largely worked with the existing Christian modifications, demonstrated again that sacred buildings can adapt to new religions, can serve successive faiths while remaining architecturally themselves. For more than 2 centuries, the Parthenon functioned as mosque, maintained by Ottoman authorities, functioning as active religious site, accumulating new history, new associations, new meaning for Muslim worshippers who knew nothing of Athena or of Athens' glory, who saw the building simply as their mosque, their place of worship, who added their own layer to the palimpsest of uses and meanings that had accumulated around this structure over 2 millennia. And then came September 26, 1687, the catastrophe that would transform the Parthenon from functioning building into ruin, that would end its career as active religious site, that would damage it so severely that no repair or restoration could make it whole again, that would freeze it in a state between building and wreck, between monument and ruin, that would paradoxically make it more famous than it had been, would create the image that has defined the Parthenon for the last 3 centuries.
The Venetian siege of Athens in 1687 was part of the larger conflict between Venice and the Ottoman Empire, part of Venice's attempts to recover territories lost to Ottoman expansion, part of the shifting power dynamics in the Eastern Mediterranean during the late 17th century. The Venetians, under the command of Francesco Morosini, besieged Athens, bombarded the Acropolis, targeted the Parthenon because the Ottomans were using it as gunpowder magazine, were storing ammunition there, were using the building's thick walls and central location as fortress, as secure storage for the explosives that were essential for defending the Acropolis against Venetian assault. The decision to use the Parthenon as gunpowder magazine was catastrophically unwise, turned the building into a bomb, created a situation where any direct hit could cause explosion that would destroy not just the ammunition, but the building itself. Whether Ottoman commanders understood this risk, whether they had alternatives, whether they thought the building's sacred history or architectural significance would deter the Venetians from targeting it, we do not know. What we know is that on September 26th, a Venetian mortar round struck the Parthenon, penetrated the roof, ignited the gunpowder, caused explosion that destroyed the building's center, brought down the central columns, collapsed much of the roof, shattered the cella walls, scattered fragments across the Acropolis, created destruction in seconds that exceeded all the damage from the previous 2,000 years combined. The explosion killed hundreds of people who were sheltering in and around the building, civilians and soldiers, Ottomans and Athenians, people who had sought safety within what they thought were strong walls, who died when those walls became projectiles, when the building they trusted to protect them destroyed them. The human tragedy was immediate and terrible, but the cultural loss extended far beyond the moment of explosion, represented destruction of irreplaceable heritage, loss of sculptures and architectural elements that had survived for 2 millennia, creation of ruins where there had been functioning building. When the smoke cleared, when the debris settled, the Parthenon was devastated. The center of the building, approximately 10 columns on each long side and several on each short end, had collapsed. The cella walls were largely destroyed. The roof was gone. Sculptures had been blown apart or had fallen and shattered. The metopes that had survived various earlier transformations were damaged or destroyed. Portions of the frieze were lost. The building that had stood essentially intact despite conversions and modifications, despite centuries of use and weather and occasional earthquake, was suddenly a ruin, was so damaged that using it for any purpose became difficult, that it could no longer serve as mosque or church or anything other than spectacular wreck. The Venetians captured Athens, but held it only briefly, withdrew after a few months, left the Ottomans to return and survey the damage. Morosini, before leaving, attempted to remove some of the surviving pediment sculptures as trophies, had them lifted from their positions, but the ropes broke and the sculptures fell and shattered, adding further destruction to what the explosion had wrought.
This final insult, this attempt to loot sculptures that ended in their destruction, completed the catastrophe, ensured that even what the explosion had spared would not survive intact, demonstrated how fragile ancient art could be, how easily it could be lost through carelessness or greed. The Ottoman authorities, returning to Athens, faced a ruin that was beyond their capacity or interest to repair. The Parthenon's usefulness as building had ended. It could not easily be rebuilt to serve as mosque or for any other purpose. The center was too damaged, the structural integrity too compromised, the effort required too great for a provincial backwater like Athens had become. The building was left as a ruin, was abandoned to weather and decay, became over the following century what it remains today, spectacular wreck, testament to ancient glory and to the catastrophic consequences of using irreplaceable monuments as military installations. The explosion transformed how the world saw the Parthenon. Before 1687, it had been a functioning building, had been mosque or church, had been actively used, had been maintained for practical purposes, had been less famous internationally than it would become. After the explosion, it became a ruin, became romantic symbol of lost civilization, became object of antiquarian interest and artistic representation, became famous precisely because it was damaged, because it embodied loss and decay, because it could be contemplated as a monument to the transience of human achievement, to the inevitable decline of civilizations, to the poignant beauty of ruins. 18th and 19th century travelers visited Athens specifically to see the Parthenon ruins, drew them and painted them, described them in letters and travel accounts, spread their fame across Europe, made the damaged Parthenon more famous than the intact building had ever been. The aesthetic of ruins, the romantic appreciation for decay and loss, the contemplation of mortality and time's passage all found perfect expression in the Parthenon's damaged state, in columns standing amid rubble, in sculptures broken and scattered, in architecture that was simultaneously magnificent and ruined, that demonstrated both human capability and human inability to preserve what has been created. This aesthetic, this appreciation for ruins, was partly genuine and partly problematic. Genuine in that ruins do possess beauty, do create opportunities for reflection and contemplation that intact buildings might not provide, do demonstrate time's passage in ways that preserved structures cannot. Problematic in that celebrating ruins could become excuse for not preserving them, for allowing further decay, for preferring a romantic wreck to careful conservation, for valuing the aesthetic of decay over the responsibility to preserve heritage. The 18th and 19th century European fascination with the ruined Parthenon sometimes valued it as a ruin more than as a monument deserving preservation, preferred it picturesque and decayed over any attempt to conserve or partially restore, created attitudes that complicated later conservation efforts.
The explosion's long-term consequences include not just physical damage, but the transformation of the Parthenon's meaning and significance, its evolution from active building to passive monument, from religious site to tourist destination, from functioning part of living city to museum piece, to object of study and contemplation rather than of use, to symbol of classical civilization rather than to building serving contemporary needs. This transformation was probably inevitable. The building could not have continued serving religious purposes indefinitely, would eventually have become monument even without the explosion. But the explosion accelerated and dramatized the transformation, created sharp break between before and after, made the Parthenon's status as ruin permanent and defining. In the early 19th century, another catastrophe befell the Parthenon, though this one was less sudden and dramatic than the 1687 explosion, was more gradual and more controversial, created debates that continue to the present day about cultural heritage, about preservation, about who owns the past and who has the right to remove and possess ancient art. This was the removal of sculptures by Thomas Bruce, Earl of Elgin, British ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, who obtained permission, the exact nature and legitimacy of this permission remains disputed, to remove sculptures from the building itself, not just fallen pieces. Ottoman authorities either agreed with this interpretation or did not care enough to prevent it. Athenian Greeks, who had no political power but who cared deeply about their heritage, were unable to stop the removal, could only watch as sculptures that had adorned their city for 2 millennia were cut from the building and taken away. The removal process was destructive. Sculptures that were still in place had to be sawed or pried free, damaging both the sculptures and the building, creating additional injury to a monument already severely damaged by the 1687 explosion. Elgin's agents worked for several years, removed approximately half of the surviving frieze, 15 metopes, 17 pediment figures, created the collection that would eventually be called the Elgin Marbles, that would become one of the British Museum's most prized possessions, that would also become one of the most controversial holdings in any museum anywhere, the subject of demands for return that have intensified rather than diminished over the 2 centuries since removal. Elgin's justifications for removal were several. He argued that the sculptures were endangered by neglect and decay, that Ottoman authorities were not maintaining them, that local Greeks were burning marble for lime or selling pieces to tourists, that removing sculptures to London would preserve them, would protect them from further damage, would ensure their survival for future generations. He argued that bringing the sculptures to London would make them accessible to scholars and artists, would allow them to be studied and appreciated, would benefit art and culture by making Greek masterworks available to Western audiences. He believed, or at least claimed to believe, that he was saving the sculptures, was acting from preservationist motives, was doing a service to civilization by rescuing endangered art. Critics, both contemporary and modern, reject these justifications, argue that Elgin was motivated by personal collecting desires and financial considerations, that he exploited his diplomatic position and Ottoman indifference to loot Greek heritage, that the removal was theft regardless of Ottoman permissions, because the Ottomans did not have moral authority to dispose of Greek cultural property, that the sculptures belong in Athens regardless of legal technicalities, that Elgin's preservationist arguments are post hoc rationalizations for actions motivated by acquisitiveness. The sculptures arrived in London in multiple shipments over several years, were initially displayed in Elgin's house, became subjects of intense interest and debate, attracted artists and scholars, influenced British art and aesthetics, introduced British audiences to Greek classical sculpture in ways that engravings and copies had never done. The direct experience of original marbles, the ability to study them closely, revolutionized British understanding of Greek art, influenced generations of British artists, contributed to neoclassical movements in architecture and sculpture, demonstrated the power of original artworks versus reproductions or descriptions. Financial pressures forced Elgin to sell the sculptures. He had spent enormous sums acquiring them, transporting them, housing them, had gone deeply into debt, needed to recoup his investment. He offered them to the British government, which initially hesitated, questioned the propriety of the acquisition, debated whether purchasing would legitimize what might be considered theft. A parliamentary committee investigated, heard testimony about the sculpture's removal, about Elgin's permissions, about their condition and value, and ultimately recommended purchase. In 1816, the government bought the sculptures for £35,000, far less than Elgin had spent, but enough to partially relieve his debts, and transferred them to the British Museum, where they remain today, the subject of ongoing demands for repatriation, the focus of passionate arguments about cultural property and colonial appropriation. The British Museum has steadfastly refused all requests for return, argues that the sculptures are legally owned, were legitimately acquired according to the laws of the time, are better preserved and more accessible in London than they would be in Athens, that returning them would set precedent requiring museums worldwide to return artifacts to countries of origin, emptying Western museums, making it impossible to maintain comprehensive collections demonstrating world art and culture. The museum argues that the sculptures have become part of world heritage, that they serve humanity better in a universal museum accessible to global audiences than they would in Athens, serving primarily Greek national interests. Greece rejects these arguments, demands return of the sculptures, calls them stolen property regardless of legal technicalities, argues that they are integral part of the Parthenon, that they cannot be properly understood divorced from their architectural context, that they belong in Athens, where they can be seen in relation to the building they were designed for, where they can be part of Greek cultural heritage and identity, where they can help tell the story of Greek civilization to Greeks and to visitors who come to Greece specifically to experience Greek culture in its homeland. The opening of the new Acropolis Museum in 2009, specifically designed to house the Parthenon sculptures in galleries where they can be displayed in the same sequence and orientation as on the original building, with views of the Acropolis itself from the museum windows, has intensified pressure for return, has removed one of the British Museum's arguments that Greece lacks adequate facilities to house and display the marbles, has created space where the sculptures could be reunited with the portions that remain in Athens, where the frieze could be reassembled nearly complete, where the full sculptural program could be experienced as designed rather than as scattered fragments. The debate continues, remains passionate and unresolved, involves questions not just about the Elgin marbles specifically, but about cultural property generally, about the legacy of colonialism, about who has the right to possess and display cultural heritage from other nations, about whether universal museums serve legitimate purpose or are simply repositories of colonial loot, about repatriation and cultural justice, about whether wrongs committed 2 centuries ago can or should be rectified today. There are no easy answers, no positions that are entirely right or entirely wrong. The Elgin marbles are better preserved than they would have been if left on the Parthenon exposed to weather and pollution. They have influenced art and culture in ways they could not have done if they had remained in Athens, inaccessible to most Western artists and scholars. They have been seen and appreciated by millions of visitors to the British Museum, have served educational purposes, have contributed to cross-cultural understanding and appreciation. But they are also removed from their context, are disconnected from the building they were designed for, cannot be understood fully without seeing them in relation to the Parthenon, without understanding how they fit into the overall architectural and sculptural program, without experiencing them as the ancient Athenians would have experienced them. They are part of Greek heritage, were created by Greek artists for Greek purposes, embody Greek civilization and culture, arguably belong in Greece regardless of who legally owns them, regardless of how they came to be in London, regardless of preservationist arguments. The question of the Elgin marble's return will likely remain controversial for years to come, will continue to generate passionate debate, will serve as test case for broader questions about cultural property and repatriation, about how we rectify colonial-era acquisitions, about whether and when museums should return objects to source countries, about balancing preservation and access against cultural rights and national heritage claims. The Parthenon sculptures, both those in London and those in Athens, will remain central to these debates, will continue to matter, not just as art objects, but as symbols of larger questions about culture, ownership, justice, and the complicated relationship between the past and the present, between what was done and what should be done, between legal rights and moral responsibilities. The 20th and 21st centuries have brought new approaches to the Parthenon, new understanding of what the building is and what it needs, new techniques for studying and preserving it, new challenges from pollution and tourism, new efforts to conserve and present it for future generations. Modern conservation is scientific, systematic, careful, based on principles that prioritize preservation of authentic ancient material, that minimize intervention, that document every action, that approach the monument with humility and respect, recognizing that we are temporary custodians of heritage that belongs to all humanity, that must be transmitted to the future as intact and authentic as possible.
The Greek government's major restoration project, begun in 1975 and ongoing, represents the most comprehensive effort to conserve the Parthenon since ancient times, employs modern engineering and material science, uses titanium instead of iron for structural reinforcements, avoiding the corrosion problems that have caused so much damage, carefully documents every stone, every intervention, every decision, creates archives that future conservators can consult, maintains transparency and scholarly rigor, invites international participation and oversight, demonstrates commitment to highest conservation standards.
This restoration faces challenges that ancient builders never confronted. The building is damaged in ways that make conservation difficult. Stones are cracked, structural elements are missing. The building's integrity is compromised in multiple ways. Pollution from Athens's traffic and industry has created acid rain that etches marble, creates black crust that disfigures surfaces, accelerates decay. Tourism brings millions of visitors who, even without touching the stones, cause wear through vibration and through the microclimate changes that crowds create. Modern Athens surrounds the Acropolis, makes it impossible to see the monument in anything like its original landscape context, changes how it is experienced and understood. The restoration work involves anastylosis, the reassembly of fallen elements, the placement of original stones back in their original positions wherever possible, using new marble only where ancient stone is too damaged or missing. This requires identifying thousands of scattered fragments, determining where each belonged, fitting them back together like three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle where most pieces are missing or damaged. Modern computer modeling helps with this, allows virtual reassembly before physical work begins, reduces errors, increases precision, demonstrates how technology can serve conservation. The work also involves structural reinforcement, ensuring that weakened elements can continue to support weight, that the building is stable and safe, that visitors are not endangered by potential collapse. This requires engineering analysis, stress calculations, careful insertion of supporting elements that are invisible from outside, but that provide essential strength, that allow the building to continue standing, that address damage from explosion and earthquake and centuries of weathering. Conservation of the sculptures presents different challenges. Those remaining in Athens are protected now in the Acropolis Museum, no longer exposed to weather, displayed in controlled environment, carefully preserved. Those in London remain in the British Museum, also carefully preserved. But the question of how to present them, how to help visitors understand what they are and what they meant, how to convey their original context and appearance, requires careful interpretation, requires exhibitions that explain without overwhelming, that provide context without intruding on direct experience, that help modern viewers bridge the gap between contemporary understanding and ancient intention. Scientific study has revealed much about the Parthenon that ancient sources never recorded, has documented the optical refinements with precision ancient builders achieved but never described, has analyzed the marble to understand quarry sources and tool techniques, has examined traces of paint to understand original polychromy, has used laser scanning to create three-dimensional models accurate to millimeters, has applied material science to understand how marble weathers and how deterioration can be slowed. This scholarship has transformed understanding, has revealed sophistication in design and execution that earlier generations did not fully appreciate, has documented refinements so subtle that only modern measuring instruments can detect them, has proven that the Parthenon's perfection is not accident, but is result of deliberate, calculated effort to achieve optimal visual effect. The documentation created by modern conservation will serve future generations, will provide information that can guide maintenance and repair, that can help future conservators make informed decisions, that preserves knowledge about the building's condition and history, that ensures continuity of care across generations.
Digital archives, physical records, published studies all contribute to creating comprehensive understanding of the Parthenon as it exists today, as it has evolved over 25 centuries, as it will continue to evolve as conservation proceeds and as new challenges emerge. The challenge of balancing preservation with access, of allowing people to experience the Parthenon while protecting it from damage that tourism can cause, requires ongoing management, requires decisions about how many visitors can be allowed, how close they can approach, what routes they can take, how the experience should be structured. The goal is to preserve the monument while allowing it to continue serving its contemporary purpose as UNESCO World Heritage Site, as symbol of classical civilization, as inspiration and education for millions of visitors who come to Athens specifically to see it, who want to connect with ancient Greece, who seek to understand classical culture through direct encounter with its greatest architectural achievement.